The surgical bay doors slammed open at 3:47 a.m., and every head turned toward the figure in borrowed scrubs 3 sizes too large. She looked terrified, hands trembling, eyes wide, like a college freshman who'd stumbled into the wrong building. Dr. Marcus Brennan didn't even try to hide his smirk. Jesus Christ, did HR pull her from a fast food joint? Someone behind him laughed. The charge nurse rolled her eyes. "Keep her away from anything sharp," Brennan muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The woman heard every word. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Then the helicopter's rotor wash rattled the windows, and her hands, those shaking, incompetent hands, went completely still. Before we dive into this story, do me a favor. Stick around until the very end. If you love twists, justice, and watching arrogance crumble, you're going to want to see how this plays out. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. St. Catherine's Regional Medical Center had a reputation that preceded it. Gleaming glass towers in downtown Portland, cutting-edge trauma units, and a surgical department so prestigious that residents fought for the chance to scrub in on a routine appendectomy. It was the kind of place where egos wore lab coats and accolades hung on walls like hunting trophies. Dr. Marcus Brennan embodied everything St. Catherine's valued. At 39, he'd already published in 3 major journals, pioneered a minimally invasive cardiac technique, and cultivated a following among medical students who treated his every pronouncement like gospel. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly convinced of his own indispensability, which made the sight of the new night shift nurse all the more offensive to his sensibilities. She appeared in the staff lounge at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, clutching a hospital badge so new the lamination still smelled like chemicals. Her scrubs were clearly borrowed, the pants pooled around her ankles, the top hung off one shoulder. She was maybe 30, pale, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's. "You the float they sent up from Med-Surg?" The charge nurse, Patricia Howell, didn't bother looking up from her clipboard. "Yes, ma'am." The woman's voice was barely audible. "Name?" "Sarah Mitchell." Patricia finally glanced up, took in the ill-fitting uniform, the white-knuckled grip on the badge. "You ever work trauma?" "No, ma'am." A resident named Chen hunched over his third coffee of the shift, snorted into his cup. "Oh, this is going to be fun." Patricia's expression suggested she agreed, but was too tired to care. "Fine. You shadow Martinez tonight. Don't touch anything without asking. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for God's sake, stay out of Dr. Brennan's way." Sarah nodded quickly, too quickly, like someone who'd heard warnings like this before and hadn't heeded them. The first hour was a masterclass in humiliation. Sarah shadowed Elena Martinez, a veteran trauma nurse with 2 decades of experience and 0 patience for incompetence. Every task became an opportunity for correction. Sarah reached for the wrong gauge needle. Elena slapped her hand away. She documented vitals in the wrong section of the chart. Elena made her redo it 3 times. When Sarah suggested checking a patient's peripheral pulse, Elena stared at her like she'd suggested bloodletting. "Did I ask for your input?" "No, I just thought..." "Then don't." The residents noticed. They always did. Fresh meat was entertainment in a place where entertainment meant someone else taking the heat for once. Dr. Brennan arrived at 1:15 a.m., summoned for a stabbing victim wheeled in from a gang dispute in Old Town. He strode into Trauma Bay 3 like a conquering general, residents and nurses parting before him. His gaze swept the room with the precision of a sniper scope and landed on Sarah, standing frozen in the corner, trying to be invisible. "Who the hell is that?" Patricia didn't look up from prepping the surgical tray. "Float nurse. Martinez is supervising. She looks like she's about to faint." "She might." Brennan's jaw tightened. "Get her out. I don't need dead weight when I'm working." Sarah's face flushed scarlet, but she didn't move. Elena grabbed her elbow and steered her toward the door. "You heard the man. Wait in the hall." The stabbing victim survived. Brennan was brilliant when he needed to be. His hands moved with mechanical precision, his commands crisp and unambiguous. The residents watched in awe. Sarah watched through the window, her expression unreadable. At 2:30 a.m., during a lull, Chen found her sitting in the staff lounge, staring at her hands. "Rough first night?" He didn't sound sympathetic, just curious. Sarah looked up. Is he always like that? Dr. Brennan? That was him being polite. You should see him when he's actually angry. Chen poured himself another coffee. Word of advice, find another hospital. This place eats people like you for breakfast. People like me? Soft, uncertain, weak. He said it matter-of-factly, like diagnosing a rash. You don't have the spine for trauma work, no shame in it. Most people don't. Sarah's fingers curled into fists on the table, knuckles whitening, but her voice stayed level. Thanks for the advice. Chen shrugged and left. She sat there for another 10 minutes, breathing slowly, methodically, like someone performing a mental reset. Then she stood, straightened her oversized scrubs, and walked back onto the floor. At 3:15 a.m., the helicopter's approach rattled the building. The sound was distinct, not the standard whoop-whoop of a medical transport, but something heavier, more aggressive. Military hardware. Sarah's head snapped up the instant the first rotor wash hit the windows. Her posture changed. The trembling stopped. Her eyes tracked the sound with the focus of a targeting system. Patricia was already moving, snapping orders. Incoming critical from a federal facility. No details. Chen, you're on airway. Martinez, get a line ready. Brennan's on his way up. The elevator doors opened and Dr. Brennan emerged, still buttoning his surgical gown. What do we know? Nothing. They said prepare for massive hemorrhage and possible TBI. Fantastic. Brennan's sarcasm could have stripped paint. Where's the float? Sarah was standing near the crash cart, her expression no longer uncertain. She looked alert, coiled. Keep her in the corner, Brennan ordered. I don't want her touching anything. The rooftop doors burst open. 2 military medics in desert fatigues rushed through, flanking a gurney. The patient was a man in his mid-40s, gray at the temples, his tactical gear soaked with blood. His face was ashen, lips cyanotic. The cardiac monitor screamed. Multiple GSWs to the torso, one medic barked. Lost vitals twice in transit. We've been bagging him for 6 minutes. Brennan took one look, and his expression went clinical. Get him on the table. Someone call the blood bank. We need ONEG, 10 units, now. The trauma team moved like a choreographed dance, IV lines snaking into place, monitors beeping their frantic warnings, hands cutting away clothing to expose wounds. Brennan's scalpel gleamed under the surgical lights. Sarah watched from her assigned corner, her eyes tracking every movement. Not the patient, the team, the angles, the rhythms. Pressure's dropping, Chen announced. 80/40. More fluids, push another liter. Brennan's hands were inside the patient's chest now, searching for the bleeder. Come on, where are you? 70/30. I see it. Clamp. The nurse handed him the instrument. Brennan clamped. The monitor didn't improve. That should have stabilized him. Sweat beaded on Brennan's forehead. Why isn't he stabilizing? Still dropping. 60 systolic. There's another bleeder. Has to be. Brennan's hands moved faster, searching, probing. Someone get me better visualization. I can't see anything in all this blood. The room devolved into controlled chaos. Orders shouted, instruments clattering, the monitor's alarm rising to a shriek. Brennan was good, but he was hunting blind. The patient was dying, and everyone knew it. Sarah stepped forward. Get back, Martinez hissed without looking at her. Sarah ignored her. Her eyes were locked on the patient's abdomen, on the pattern of bruising spreading beneath the ribs. She'd seen this before, not in a hospital, somewhere else. Stop compressions, she said. The room froze. Every head turned. Brennan looked up, blood to his elbows, fury igniting in his eyes. What did you just say? Sarah's voice was steady now, stripped of all uncertainty. Stop compressions. You're pushing blood into the peritoneal cavity. The bleed's posterior, retrohepatic. You won't find it where you're looking. Brennan's face went purple. Are you out of your goddamn mind? You don't stop compressions on a coding patient. You don't. If you keep compressing, he's dead in 2 minutes. Sarah was already moving toward the table. The bullet tracked upward. It nicked the IVC behind the liver. Every compression is pumping blood where you can't reach it. Security, Brennan roared. Get her out of here now. But Sarah was faster. She shouldered past Martinez, grabbed a pair of gloves from the dispenser with practiced efficiency, and before anyone could physically stop her, she positioned herself at the patient's side. You're finished, Brennan snarled. You just ended your career. Probably. Sarah's hands didn't shake as she reached into the wound, her fingers moving with absolute confidence. But he won't be dead. The room held its breath. Sarah's hand disappeared into the surgical field, bypassing everything Brennan had been searching through, angling upward and posterior. Her eyes closed briefly, feeling rather than seeing. There. Her voice was barely a whisper. Pressure here. Direct manual compression. The monitor's alarm changed pitch. The frantic screaming slowed, steadied. Chen stared at the screen. Pressure's rising. 80, 90 systolic. Patricia's hands had frozen mid-motion, a package of gauze clutched forgotten. How? Sarah's eyes opened. She looked at Brennan. You can clamp it now. 2 centimeters superior to my index finger. You'll need vascular sutures, running stitch, 5-0 Proline. Brennan stood paralyzed, trapped between professional pride and the undeniable reality that this terrified float nurse had just done what he couldn't. The patient's vitals continued to stabilize. The monitor's rhythm normalized. Finally, moving like a man in a dream, Brennan reached for the clamp. Here? His voice was stripped of arrogance. 3 millimeters higher. You'll tear it otherwise. He adjusted, clamped. The bleeding stopped. Sarah carefully withdrew her hand, blood dripping from her glove. The room remained silent except for the steady beep of the monitor, no longer screaming, but singing. Sutures, Brennan said quietly. Someone placed them in his hand. He worked mechanically now, closing what Sarah had found, saving what she'd saved. 10 minutes later, the patient was stable. Critical, but stable. Brennan stepped back from the table, stripped off his gloves. He looked at Sarah. She stood against the wall again, blood on her scrubs, her expression neutral. What's your name? He asked. Sarah Mitchell. Where did you train? She didn't answer. I said, where did you? The trauma bay doors burst open. 2 men in dark suits, earpieces visible, federal agents by every indicator. Behind them, a woman in a Navy service uniform, commander's eagles on her collar. Is he stable? The commander's voice cut through the room like a blade. Patricia found her voice first. Yes, ma'am. Critical, but stable. The commander's gaze swept the room, taking in the blood, the shocked faces, the monitors. Then her eyes found Sarah and her expression shifted. Surprise, recognition, something else. Lieutenant Mitchell, the commander's tone changed entirely. I didn't know you were in Portland. The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. Sarah stood straighter, old habits emerging. I'm not active duty anymore, ma'am. Clearly. The commander approached, her eyes on Sarah's blood-soaked scrubs. Did you work on the patient? She had no authorization, Brennan interjected, finding his voice. She's a float nurse. First night, she violated protocol, contaminated the surgical field. The commander held up one hand. Brennan stopped talking. Did you work on the patient? Each word was a separate sentence. Sarah nodded once. The commander turned to Brennan. Then you owe her your patient's life. That man is Captain James Hardwick, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. He's survived 3 deployments and more firefights than you've performed surgeries. And whoever stabilized him just performed the kind of battlefield medicine that earns medals. Brennan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The commander looked back at Sarah. How long since you separated? 14 months? And you're working as a float nurse. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. Yes, ma'am. That's a waste, Lieutenant. I'm not a lieutenant anymore. The commander's expression suggested she disagreed but knew better than to argue the point. We need to talk. Not here, not now, but soon. She handed Sarah a card. Call me. Then she was gone, the federal agents following, leaving a vacuum of silence in their wake. Patricia broke it first. Someone want to tell me what the hell just happened? Sarah peeled off her gloves, dropped them in the biohazard bin. I need to clean up. No. Brennan's voice was quiet but absolute. You need to explain, right now. Sarah turned to face him. The terrified woman from 3 hours ago was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. Someone whose hands didn't shake, whose eyes didn't drop, whose voice carried the weight of experience that had nothing to do with hospital rotations. "I was a combat medic," she said simply. "Force recon. 4 deployments. I've worked trauma in places that make this look like a spa. I know what a retrohepatic IVC injury looks like because I've stopped that exact bleed with my bare hands while under mortar fire." She paused. "I came here to start over, to learn how to work in a place where people don't die quite so often. I wasn't trying to step on anyone's toes." "Then why the hell were you acting like—" Chen stopped himself. "Like I was terrified?" Sarah's smile was sad. "Because I was. Combat medicine and hospital medicine aren't the same thing. Your protocols, your hierarchies, your equipment, it's all different. I didn't want to presume. I didn't want to be that veteran who walks in acting like she knows everything." She looked at Brennan. "I was trying to respect your space by breaking protocol and contaminating my surgical field." But Brennan's voice had lost its edge. "By saving your patient when you were 30 seconds from losing him." Sarah's tone wasn't cruel, just factual. "You're a brilliant surgeon, Dr. Brennan. I watched you work. But you were trained in controlled environments, perfect lighting, ideal angles. You've probably never had to operate with someone's intestines in your lap while checking for snipers. That patient needed someone who had." The silence stretched. Finally, Patricia spoke. "Dr. Brennan, we need to document this, file a report." "File what?" Brennan's voice was hollow. "That a float nurse saved a patient I was losing? That military brass just confirmed she's got more trauma experience than this entire department combined?" He looked at Sarah. "You made me look like an idiot." "No." Sarah's voice was gentle. "I made you look human. There's a difference." Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "We need to talk. Tomorrow. My office." "Am I fired?" "I don't know yet." He stripped off his surgical gown. "But that patient is alive because you broke the rules. I'm not sure how to file that in the incident report." He left. The residents followed like confused ducklings. Martinez began cleaning up, her movements mechanical, her eyes avoiding Sarah's. Patricia waited until they were alone. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Probably both. Sarah looked at the blood on her scrubs. "I should go change." "Sarah," Patricia's voice stopped her at the door. "That thing you did, finding the bleed by feel, knowing exactly where to compress, how many times have you done that?" Sarah considered the question. "Enough to know I'd do it again." "Even knowing it might cost you this job?" "A job's just a job. That man has people who love him. He gets to go home to them now." Sarah's voice was steady. "So yeah, I'd do it again." Patricia nodded slowly. "Get cleaned up. We've still got 6 hours left on this shift." Sarah walked to the locker room, past windows where the first hints of dawn were breaking over Portland's skyline. Her reflection in the glass looked different now, still wearing the same oversized scrubs, but no longer trembling, no longer uncertain. She'd come to St. Catherine's to start over, to leave the war behind, to learn a new kind of medicine in a world that didn't involve gunfire and death. Instead, the war had followed her through those doors, wrapped in tactical gear and bleeding out on a gurney, and she'd responded the only way she knew how, by doing what needed to be done. The locker room was empty. Sarah stripped off the bloody scrubs, stood under the shower, and let the hot water wash away the evidence. But not the memory. Never the memory. Her hands were steady as she dressed in clean scrubs, still borrowed, still too large, but somehow they felt different now, like armor instead of a disguise. When she returned to the floor, the trauma bay had been cleaned. New patients cycled through, a car accident, a fall from scaffolding, the endless parade of human fragility. Sarah worked alongside Martinez, who gave orders now with less contempt, more calculation, testing her, seeing what else she could do. At 6:45 a.m., as the day shift arrived and the night crew prepared to hand over, Sarah was documenting her last patient's vitals when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Captain Hardwick is awake. He's asking for you." She showed the message to Patricia, who read it and handed back the phone. "Go, your shift's over anyway." The ICU was 2 floors up. Sarah found the room by following the trail of federal agents posted at strategic intervals. They watched her approach with the flat stares of people trained to assess threats in milliseconds. The commander from earlier stood outside the door. She looked tired but alert. "He's weak," she said without preamble. "You get 5 minutes." Sarah nodded and entered. Captain James Hardwick looked smaller in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors reducing him to something fragile, but his eyes were sharp when they found her. "You're the one who kept me breathing." His voice was a rasp. "You're the one who stayed alive long enough for me to help." A ghost of a smile. "They said you violated protocol, went rogue." "I did what needed doing." "That's the same thing we tell ourselves when the mission goes sideways." His smile faded. "I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything, Captain. You just focus on healing." Hardwick's right hand moved slowly, trembling with effort, until it rose in a salute, weak, imperfect, but unmistakable. Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't been saluted in 14 months, hadn't been acknowledged as anything but a civilian, a student, a burden. The gesture hit harder than she expected. She returned the salute, sharp and clean, muscle memory overriding civilian protocols. "Hoo-yah, Lieutenant," Hardwick whispered. "Hoo-yah, Captain." When Sarah left the room, the commander was waiting. "He asked me to give you this." She handed over a coin, Seal Trident on one side, Hardwick's unit on the other. A challenge coin, the kind given to honor exceptional service. Sarah turned it over in her palm. "Ma'am, you're not active duty, I know, but that man in there has survived things that would break most people, and he said you saved his life with a level of skill he's only seen in combat zones. So take the coin, Lieutenant. You earned it." Sarah pocketed the coin. "Thank you, ma'am." The commander studied her. "You're wasted in that emergency room." "I'm trying to build a new life." "By hiding who you are?" "By learning who I could be if the war wasn't the only thing I'm good at." The commander nodded slowly. "I understand, but if you ever want to put those skills to use in a place that appreciates them, call me. We always need people who can think under pressure and don't freeze when everything goes to hell." She left before Sarah could respond. The morning sun was fully up when Sarah finally exited St. Catherine's. She stood on the sidewalk, people streaming past her into their ordinary days, and felt the weight of the last 8 hours settling into her bones. She'd come here to disappear, to be nobody special, to learn how to save lives without the adrenaline and chaos of combat. Instead, she'd been mocked, humiliated, dismissed, and then forced to become exactly what she'd been trying to leave behind. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a formal email from St. Catherine's HR. Report to administration at 2 p.m. for disciplinary review. Sarah read it twice, then pocketed her phone. She'd known this was coming. The question was what came next, and whether the woman who'd saved Captain Hardwick could survive in a world that demanded she be someone smaller, quieter, more acceptable. As she walked to her car, Sarah's hand found the challenge coin in her pocket. She rubbed her thumb over the raised metal, feeling the edges of the trident. Some things, she realized, you couldn't outrun. Some parts of who you were stayed with you no matter how far you traveled or how hard you tried to start over. The war had followed her to Portland, and now she had to decide whether to keep running or finally stand her ground. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and institutional anxiety. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain gray sweater, because the borrowed scrubs felt like a costume she no longer had permission to wear. The hallway outside administration was empty, except for a maintenance worker buffing the floors with mechanical precision, the buffer's hum filling the silence like white noise. She sat on a bench near the door, hands folded in her lap, breathing the way she'd been trained, slow counts, 4 in, 6 out, maintaining calm when everything around you suggested panic was the rational response. The challenge coin was in her pocket. She touched it once, briefly, then forced her hand away. At 1:58 p.m., the door opened. A woman in her 50s emerged, clipboard in hand, expression neutral in that way administrators perfected when delivering bad news was a daily requirement. "That's Mitchell? They're ready for you." The conference room held 5 people arranged like a tribunal. Dr. Marcus Brennan sat at the far end, his expression unreadable. Beside him was Patricia Howell, the charge nurse, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Across from them sat 2 people Sarah didn't recognize, a man in a crisp suit who had legal department written all over him, and a woman whose hospital ID identified her as Dr. Veronica Chen, chief of surgery. At the head of the table sat Douglas Mercer, hospital administrator, a man whose silver hair and expensive watch suggested he spent more time in boardrooms than anywhere near actual patients. "Please sit, Ms. Mitchell." Mercer's voice was professionally cordial, which somehow made it worse. Sarah sat. Waited. Mercer opened a manila folder, scanned it briefly. "Let's get straight to the point. Last night, you violated multiple hospital protocols during a critical surgery. You entered a sterile field without authorization, countermanded a surgeon's direct orders, and performed medical procedures outside your scope of practice as a registered nurse." He looked up. "Do you dispute any of these facts?" "No, sir." "Then you understand the severity of what you did." "I understand that a patient is alive who wouldn't be otherwise." The lawyer's pen paused mid-note. Dr. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. Mercer's professional cordiality cooled by several degrees. "That's not for you to determine. Dr. Brennan is one of our most accomplished surgeons. He had the situation under control." "With respect, sir, he didn't." Sarah kept her voice level. "The patient was coding. Blood pressure was crashing. Dr. Brennan was searching for a bleed he couldn't locate because his approach was based on standard trauma protocols. But that wasn't a standard trauma case." "And you determined this how?" Dr. Chen spoke for the first time. "Based on what exactly? Your extensive experience as a float nurse?" Patricia shifted in her seat but said nothing. Sarah met Chen's gaze. "Based on my experience treating similar injuries in field conditions. Retrohepatic IVC injuries present differently when the patient's been moved multiple times, when there's been significant time between initial trauma and surgical intervention. The bleeding pattern was posterior. The compression injuries suggested upward bullet trajectory." "Enough," Mercer held up a hand. "Ms. Mitchell, we're aware of your military background. Commander Hayes from Naval Special Warfare contacted me this morning to provide context." His tone suggested he found this contact more irritating than enlightening. "However, this hospital operates under civilian medical protocols and a strict chain of command. Your unilateral decision to override a supervising physician created liability exposure we cannot ignore." "So I should have let him die to protect the hospital from lawsuits?" The words came out sharper than Sarah intended. The lawyer looked up sharply. "Ms. Mitchell, I'd advise you to moderate your tone. I'd advise you to moderate your priorities." Sarah didn't raise her voice, but something in it made everyone in the room focus. That patient is someone's husband, someone's father, someone's commanding officer. He has people who need him alive. I made sure he stayed that way. If that's a fireable offense, then fire me. But don't pretend it's about protocols when it's really about ego. Brennan stirred. "That's out of line." "Is it?" Sarah turned to him. "You're brilliant, Dr. Brennan. I said it last night and I mean it, but you were trained in ideal conditions. You've never had to improvise with inadequate equipment, poor lighting, and mortar rounds landing 50 meters away. You've never had to make a call knowing that hesitation means death, and action might mean court-martial. I have. So when I saw what you were missing, I acted. Because in my world, saving the patient isn't a violation, it's the mission." Silence settled over the room like fog. Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Your world. Past tense. You're not in the military anymore, Ms. Mitchell. You're in a civilian hospital with civilian rules, and those rules exist for a reason. They protect patients, staff, and the institution. What you did, regardless of outcome, undermined the entire structure we've built here. The structure almost killed that patient. The structure has saved thousands of patients over decades of operation. Then maybe it's time to adapt the structure." Sarah's hands were flat on the table now, steady and sure. "How many of your doctors have treated combat casualties? How many have worked trauma in environments where backup isn't coming and supplies are limited? How many have had to make life or death calls without CT scans, without labs, without anything but their hands and their training?" "We're not a battlefield hospital," Mercer said coldly. "No, you're better equipped and better funded. But sometimes you get battlefield injuries, and when you do, you need people who know how to handle them. Last night proved that." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Ms. Mitchell, regardless of the philosophical debate, the facts remain. You violated policy, We have no choice but to terminate your employment, effective immediately." There it was, the inevitable conclusion. Sarah nodded slowly. "Understood." Patricia finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I'd like to note for the record that Ms. Mitchell's actions were informed by specialized training and experience that proved directly relevant to the patient's survival. While protocol was violated, the outcome suggests her judgment was sound." The lawyer shot her a look that could have frozen nitrogen. "Your objection is noted, Ms. Howell." Brennan was staring at his hands, jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. Mercer began gathering his papers. "Ms. Mitchell, you'll need to surrender your badge and complete exit processing with HR. Your final paycheck will be—" The conference room door opened without warning. Commander Hayes entered, still in her service uniform, followed by the 2 federal agents from the night before. Behind them came a man Sarah didn't recognize, mid-60s, gray suit, the kind of face that suggested power exercised quietly. Mercer stood abruptly. "Commander, this is a closed disciplinary hearing. You can't just—" "Mr. Mercer." The man in the gray suit's voice was soft but absolute. "My name is Richard Cordell. I'm with the Department of Defense, Office of Special Operations Liaison. I apologize for the interruption, but this matter requires immediate clarification." Cordell placed a briefcase on the table, opened it with practiced efficiency, and extracted several documents. "Last night, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell—" "She's not a lieutenant," the lawyer interjected. "She separated from service 14 months ago." "Ms. Mitchell, then?" Cordell didn't miss a beat. "Ms. Mitchell provided emergency medical care to Captain James Hardwick, a naval special warfare officer engaged in classified operations. The nature of his injuries and the circumstances of his transport are subject to federal jurisdiction. As such, any disciplinary action taken against Ms. Mitchell for her role in his treatment falls under our purview, not the hospital's." Mercer's face went from composed to thunderous. "You're saying we can't discipline our own employee?" "I'm saying that the employee in question prevented the death of a federal asset during a classified operation. Her actions, while unorthodox, were consistent with her training and directly contributed to national security interests. The Department of Defense is prepared to provide full documentation supporting her decisions." Cordell slid a folder across the table to Mercer. "We're also prepared to discuss this in federal court if you'd prefer that route." The room's temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Dr. Chen found her voice first. "Are you threatening us?" "I'm informing you of jurisdictional facts." Cordell's expression didn't change. "Captain Hardwick's survival is a matter of significant importance to ongoing operations. The individuals responsible for that survival will be recognized and protected accordingly. If St. Catherine's wishes to terminate Ms. Mitchell's employment, that's your prerogative. But understand that doing so will trigger a formal inquiry into why a civilian hospital's protocols resulted in a situation where a veteran was forced to violate those protocols to save a patient your staff was losing." Brennan's head snapped up. "That's not, isn't it?" Commander Hayes spoke quietly. "Dr. Brennan, your skills are impressive. I've reviewed your record. But Lieutenant Mitchell identified an injury pattern you missed and implemented a treatment approach you weren't trained for. Those are facts, not criticisms. The question is whether this hospital values ego over outcomes." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes explosions. Mercer's knuckles were white on the folder Cordell had given him. "This is highly irregular." "So was the situation that required Ms. Mitchell's intervention." Cordell checked his watch. "I have a meeting in 40 minutes. Commander Hayes has provided a full report on Lieutenant Mitchell's service record and combat medical experience. I suggest you review it before making any final decisions. Good afternoon?" He left as abruptly as he'd arrived, the federal agents following like shadows. Commander Hayes remained. She looked at Sarah, something like approval in her eyes, then turned to Mercer. "Captain Hardwick requested I deliver a message. He said, and I quote, 'That woman saved my life using skills she earned in places most people can't imagine. If you punish her for that, you're exactly the kind of bureaucrats who get good people killed.'" Hayes paused. "He's not known for diplomatic phrasing, but he's rarely wrong about people." She nodded once to Sarah and departed. The conference room felt like a bomb crater, shocked, smoking, everyone staring at the damage and trying to process what had just happened. Finally, Mercer spoke. We'll need time to review this new information. Take all the time you need. Sarah stood. But I'm not apologizing for saving someone's life, and I won't pretend that following protocols that don't account for battlefield injuries was the right call. If that means I can't work here, I'll find somewhere else. She pulled out her hospital badge, set it on the table. I'll wait for your decision. She walked out before anyone could respond. The hallway seemed brighter after the conference room's fluorescent hostility. Sarah made it to the elevator before her hands started shaking. Adrenaline crashed, delayed reaction, the body finally processing what the mind had been too focused to acknowledge. She rode down to the main lobby, found a bench near the windows, and sat. 20 minutes later, Patricia found her. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, the charge nurse said, sitting down without invitation. You said that already. It bears repeating. Patricia handed her a bottle of water. Drink. You look like you're about to pass out. Sarah took the water, drank half of it in one pull. Thanks. Brennan asked me to give you this. Patricia produced a business card. He wants to talk, off the record. Sarah studied the card. Marcus Brennan, MD, with a personal cell number written on the back in neat script. About what? He didn't say, but he looked shaken when he asked me to find you. I've worked with Brennan for 6 years. I've never seen him shaken. He almost lost a patient. He's lost patients before. This was different. Patricia stood. Call him. Don't call him. Your choice. But you should know. When the feds left and Mercer was still sputtering, Brennan said something. He said you were right. About the structure needing to adapt. About battlefield medicine requiring different thinking. He said it in front of Chen and Mercer and the legal vulture, and he didn't back down when they pushed back. Sarah looked up sharply. He defended me? He defended the work. There's a difference, but it's a start. Patricia started to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I would have done the same thing you did. The intervention, not the confrontation. I'm too old to pick fights with administrators. But watching you do it? A small smile. That was the most interesting disciplinary hearing I've ever attended. She walked away before Sarah could respond. Sarah sat on the bench for another hour, watching people come and go, visitors carrying flowers, patients shuffling in wheelchairs, staff switching shifts. The normal machinery of a hospital grinding away, lives saved and lost and saved again in an endless cycle. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Marcus Brennan. We need to talk. Not about the hearing, about something else. Coffee? Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed, When? Now, if you're available, there's a place across the street, Sullivan's. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Sullivan's was the kind of coffee shop that served hospital staff and medical students. Cheap caffeine, free Wi-Fi, booths scarred by years of stressed studying and exhausted conversations. Brennan was already there, sitting in a back corner booth, a untouched coffee in front of him. He looked different out of surgical scrubs. Younger somehow, less armored. Sarah slid into the opposite side. I didn't expect federal intervention. Neither did I. Brennan's laugh was short, humorless. I especially didn't expect to watch the hospital administrator get dressed down by a DOD official in my presence. That was a first. Sorry if I complicated your life. Don't apologize. I spent the last 2 hours thinking about what you said. He finally met her eyes. About being trained in ideal conditions. About never having to improvise under fire. You were right. I was brilliant in that trauma bay right up until the situation stopped resembling my training, and then I was blind. Sarah said nothing, waiting. Brennan continued. I've performed over 1,000 surgeries. I've saved hundreds of lives. But I've never had to operate knowing that failure meant someone didn't go home to their family, that hesitation was the same as killing them. I've always had backup, consultants, advanced imaging, time to think. He paused. You've never had those luxuries, have you? Not in theater, no. How many times have you done what you did last night? Found a bleed by feel, stopped it with your bare hands, saved someone who was already as good as dead. Sarah considered lying, softening the truth, then decided against it. 17 times. That I can remember clearly. Maybe more. Some of them blur together. Brennan absorbed this. 17. Jesus. He pushed his coffee aside. I came here to tell you something. When Mercer asks for my recommendation on your employment, and he will, because covering his ass requires knowing where the department stands, I'm going to tell him you should be reinstated immediately. More than that, I'm going to recommend we create a position for you. Combat trauma specialist. Someone who can consult on cases that fall outside normal protocols, who can train our staff on battlefield medicine applications. Sarah blinked. You're serious? Completely. What you did last night wasn't just saving one patient, it exposed a gap in our capabilities we didn't know existed. We're a level 1 trauma center. We get gang violence, car accidents, industrial injuries, all the same patterns, treated the same ways. But we're not prepared for military casualties, for injuries sustained in combat situations. If Hardwick had arrived and you weren't there? Brennan shook his head. I would have lost him, and I wouldn't have known why until the autopsy. Brennan, Marcus. Call me Marcus when we're not in the hospital. Marcus? This morning you wanted me fired. Hell, 12 hours ago you wanted me nowhere near your operating room. 12 hours ago I was an arrogant bastard who thought his credentials meant he knew everything. Marcus's smile was self-deprecating. You performed a very public demonstration of how wrong I was. I can either be defensive about it, or I can learn from it. I'm choosing option 2. Sarah leaned back against the booth. The administration won't go for it. Mercer looked like he wanted to kill me. Chen wasn't much better. Chen's pragmatic. If I frame it as reducing liability and improving outcomes, she'll consider it. Mercer's the problem. He thinks in terms of reputation and risk management. But here's the thing. Marcus leaned forward. The feds came in today and basically told him that punishing you would result in a federal investigation into our trauma protocols. That's leverage. Mercer hates bad publicity more than he hates being wrong. If we can show him that keeping you on staff, elevating your role, makes St. Catherine's look innovative instead of incompetent, he'll take it. That's a lot of ifs. It's also the best option you have. The alternative is they let you go, you find work somewhere else, and St. Catherine's goes back to treating combat injuries like standard trauma cases. Next time, maybe the patient isn't so lucky. Sarah thought about Hardwick, about the feel of his blood on her hands, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat after she'd stopped the bleed. She thought about the 17 others, names she still remembered, faces that appeared in dreams, all of them alive because she'd refused to accept that death was inevitable just because the situation was impossible. If I do this, she said slowly, I need real authority. Not just consultant role where doctors can ignore my input if it conflicts with their approach. If I see something wrong, I need to be able to act. Agreed. With appropriate protocols and oversight, but yes, real authority. And I need protection from people like the lawyer in that hearing. The second something goes wrong, they'll use me as a scapegoat. I'll make sure any agreement includes liability coverage and professional protections. You save the patient, the hospital backs you up. Non-negotiable. Sarah studied him. Why are you doing this? 12 hours ago, I embarrassed you in front of your team. I challenged your judgment, violated your surgical field, made you look incompetent. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When I was in medical school, I had this professor, Dr. Elizabeth Warren, vascular surgery. She was brilliant, terrifying, and completely uncompromising. One day she told us something I've never forgotten. She said, your ego will kill people if you let it. The moment you think you're the smartest person in the room is the moment you stop learning, and the moment you stop learning is the moment patients start dying. He met Sarah's eyes. Last night, my ego almost killed Captain Hardwick. You were smarter than me, faster than me, more experienced in exactly the type of injury he had. If I'd been smart enough to listen instead of defensive enough to reject you, we could have saved him faster, cleaner, with less risk. Instead, I almost let a good man die to protect my pride. You were working within your training. My training was insufficient for the situation. That's not a criticism of me. It's a fact. And facts don't care about my feelings. Marcus finished his coffee. I became a doctor to save lives. You did too, in your own way. Last night you were better at it than me. I can either resent that, or I can figure out how to make sure we're both better at it together. I'm choosing the latter. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying since she walked into St. Catherine's, the weight of trying to be smaller, quieter, less than what she was. "All right," she said. "Let's try." Marcus smiled, genuine this time, reaching his eyes. "Good. Now I need to go convince Chen and Mercer that this is their idea. Give me 48 hours. And if they say no, then I'll make enough noise about our inability to handle military trauma that they'll have to explain why they fired the one person who could have fixed the problem." He stood, offered his hand. "I'm good at making noise when I need to." Sarah shook his hand. His grip was firm, professional, the grasp of someone who'd made a decision and intended to see it through. He left the coffee shop and Sarah sat alone with her thoughts. Her phone buzzed again. This time, Commander Hayes. "Captain Hardwick would like to see you again. He's more alert today. Visiting hours until 8 p.m. if you're free." Sarah checked the time. Almost 5. She could go home, collapse, process the chaos of the last 24 hours. Or she could go see the man whose life had upended hers. She texted back, "I'll be there in 30 minutes." The ICU was quieter during evening hours, the frantic energy of morning rounds replaced by the steady hum of monitors and soft conversations. The federal agents were gone, replaced by a single Navy petty officer stationed outside Hardwick's room. He nodded to Sarah as she approached. "He's expecting you, ma'am." Hardwick was sitting up this time, color returning to his face, though the monitors and IV lines remained. He smiled when she entered. "They told me you got called into the principal's office." His voice was stronger. "Something like that. Also told me a DoD liaison showed up and made everyone piss themselves." The smile widened. "That true? Apparently my saving your life became a federal matter." "Damn right it did." Hardwick's expression sobered. "I made some calls, told some people what happened. Turns out when a DevGru captain says someone saved his life under circumstances that would have earned a medal in theater, people listen." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. You know how many medics I've worked with over 23 years? Dozens. Good ones, bad ones, ones who froze when the shit hit the fan. You're in the top 3 I've ever seen, and the only civilian." He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "What you did last night, finding that bleed, knowing exactly how to stop it, that's not luck. That's repetition, muscle memory. How many guys like me have you put back together?" "Enough." "Enough to give you nightmares?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, thought so." Hardwick's eyes held understanding. "You know what I told Commander Hayes? I told her you're wasted in a regular hospital. You should be training combat medics, working with special operations medical teams, teaching the next generation how to do what you do. Instead, you're here getting shit from doctors who've never heard a shot fired in anger. I left the military because I wanted something different, something quieter. How's that working out for you?" Despite everything, Sarah laughed. "Not great, apparently." "Listen." Hardwick's tone shifted, became serious. "I don't know your story, why you separated, what you're running from or running to. That's your business. But I know talent when I see it, and I know when someone's trying to hide what makes them exceptional. You did that last night, tried to be invisible, to not step on toes, to be less than what you are. And when it mattered, you couldn't help being exactly what you are, a warrior who saves lives." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I don't want to be a warrior anymore." "Then don't be. Be a healer who learned her skills in war. Be a doctor who knows what combat looks like. Be whatever you want. But don't be less than you are because it makes other people comfortable." He paused. "The world's got enough people trying to be smaller. It needs more people willing to be exactly as capable as they actually are. Even if it costs them everything? Especially then." Hardwick's smile was sad. "You know what I've learned in 23 years of doing impossible shit? The things that cost you everything are usually the things worth doing, and the people who make you pay for being exceptional are usually the people too scared to be exceptional themselves." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Captain Hardwick, you need rest. Visitors need to wrap up." Sarah stood. "Thank you. For the calls, for the support. You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did. You saved my life. That's not a debt. It's a bond. It means I'm invested in making sure you're okay, that the system doesn't chew you up for doing the right thing." He met her eyes. "Whatever happens with the hospital, you're not alone in this. Remember that." Sarah left before the emotion she was holding could break free. The parking garage was nearly empty, evening shift having started an hour ago. Sarah found her car, a beat-up Honda that had seen better days, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Her phone showed 3 new messages, one from Marcus. Meeting with Chen tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll keep you updated. One from Patricia. You okay? Text me if you need anything. One from Commander Hayes. Spoke with Captain Hardwick's CO. They want to discuss opportunities if St. Catherine's doesn't work out. No pressure, just options. Sarah stared at the messages, at the different futures they represented. She could wait for Marcus to fight her battle, hope that politics and pragmatism aligned in her favor. She could accept defeat, find work elsewhere, start over again in another city where nobody knew her story. She could take Hayes up on the offer, return to the world she'd left, to work that she understood even if it haunted her, or she could do something else entirely. Her fingers moved before she'd fully decided, opening her contacts, finding a number she hadn't called in months. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Sarah? That you? Hey, David, it's me. David Park had been her platoon sergeant, the man who'd trained her, deployed with her, pulled her out of the fire when she'd been injured during her last mission. He'd separated 6 months before she did, taken a job with a private military contractor doing medical training. Damn, it's good to hear your voice. How you been? Complicated. Listen, you still doing that training work, teaching combat medicine to contractors? Yeah, why? You looking for work? Maybe, or maybe I'm looking to prove a point. She took a breath. You ever work with civilian hospitals, teaching battlefield trauma applications to emergency room staff? David was quiet for a moment. Not yet, but I've thought about it. There's a market for it. Trauma centers getting more complex injuries, active shooter situations, mass casualty events. They need people who've seen the real thing. Why? Because I just demonstrated why that training matters, and now I need to convince a hospital administrator that it's worth investing in. How fast could you put together a proposal for a training program? For you? Give me 48 hours. What's the angle? Sarah smiled. The angle is that battlefield medicine isn't just for battlefields anymore, and the people who know it best shouldn't be hiding what they can do. They should be teaching everyone else how to do it. Now that, David said, sounds like the Sarah Mitchell I remember, the one who didn't take no for an answer and saved my ass more times than I can count. They talked for 20 more minutes, ideas flowing, plan taking shape. When Sarah finally ended the call, she felt different, not uncertain, not trembling, not trying to be smaller. She felt ready. Ready to fight not just for herself, but for the idea that skills earned in combat had value beyond the battlefield, that the people who'd survived war and learned to save lives in impossible circumstances deserved a place in the world they'd fought to protect. Ready to show St. Catherine's and everyone who doubted her exactly what a warrior looked like when she stopped apologizing for being good at keeping people alive. She started the car and drove home through Portland's evening traffic, the challenge coin heavy in her pocket, Hardwick's words echoing in her mind. Don't be less than you are because it makes other people comfortable. Tomorrow, she'd stop trying to be less. Tomorrow, she'd show them exactly what she was. And if they didn't like it, they could fire her with the full knowledge that they'd chosen comfort over competence. Her phone buzzed one more time as she pulled into her apartment building. Another unknown number. Ms. Mitchell, this is Douglas Mercer. We need to meet tomorrow. My office, 10 a.m. Come prepared to discuss your future at St. Catherine's. Sarah read the message twice, analyzing the tone, the word choice, the deliberate ambiguity. Then she texted back, I'll be there. And Mr. Mercer? So will my proposal for a combat trauma training program. See you at 10. She sent it before she could second guess, before caution could override conviction. Because Hardwick was right. The things that cost you everything were usually the things worth doing, and she was done paying the cost of being less than she was. Sarah spent that night at her kitchen table with her laptop, a pot of coffee, and the kind of focused intensity that had kept her alive through 4 deployments. David Park sent over his preliminary training framework at 11 p.m., a 20-page document outlining combat trauma protocols, teaching methodologies, and cost-benefit analyses that read like a military operation plan. Because that's exactly what it was. She adapted it for civilian consumption, stripped out the jargon that would make administrators defensive, emphasized outcomes and liability reduction. By 3 a.m., she had a 30-slide presentation titled Battlefield Medicine Applications for Civilian Trauma Centers, a comprehensive training initiative. By 5 a.m., she'd rehearsed it 6 times, anticipating every objection Mercer could raise. At 6 a.m., she showered, dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a charcoal suit she'd bought for job interviews 14 months ago, and drove to Catherine's through pre-dawn darkness. The hospital looked different in morning light, less intimidating somehow. Or maybe she was just done being intimidated. Marcus was waiting in the lobby, 2 coffees in hand. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "You actually brought a proposal." Not a question. "You doubted me?" "No, I'm just impressed by the speed." He handed her a coffee. "Chen agreed to sit in on your meeting with Mercer. She wants to hear what you have to say." "That's good, right?" "It means she's considering the idea. Whether that's good depends on how well you sell it." Marcus checked his watch. "You've got 3 hours? Want to do a dry run?" They found an empty conference room. Sarah pulled up her presentation on her laptop while Marcus sat in the back row, arms crossed, expression neutral. She started talking. 3 slides in, he held up a hand. "Stop." Sarah paused. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. It's good. But you're presenting it like you're asking for permission. These people respect authority and certainty. You need to present this like it's already decided, and they're just smart enough to recognize a good idea when they see it. That's arrogant. That's effective. Mercer responds to confidence, Chen responds to data. Give them both, but lead with strength." Marcus stood, walked to the front. "Watch. Slide 1. Don't say I propose we consider. Say, St. Catherine's will implement a combat trauma training program because the medical landscape has changed, and we're uniquely positioned to lead that change. See the difference?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Less asking, more stating." "Exactly. You're not a supplicant. You're an expert offering your expertise to an institution that needs it. Act like it." They ran through the presentation again. This time Sarah adjusted her tone, her posture, the way she framed each point. Marcus stopped her less frequently, his nods of approval more common. At 9:45 a.m., Patricia appeared in the doorway. "They're ready for you? Conference room A." Sarah closed her laptop, tucked it under her arm. Marcus caught her eye. "Remember, you saved a man's life doing exactly what you're about to propose they let you teach. That's not debatable. That's proven. Use it." Conference room A was larger than yesterday's tribunal space, with windows overlooking the city and a table that could seat 20. Only 4 chairs were occupied. Douglas Mercer at the head, Dr. Veronica Chen to his right, the hospital's lawyer, whose name Sarah had learned was Philip Rosenstein, to his left, and 1 empty chair facing all 3. No Marcus. No Patricia. No allies. Sarah sat without waiting for invitation. Mercer studied her for a long moment. "I received your text last night. A combat trauma training program. Interesting proposition." "Not a proposition, Mr. Mercer. A solution to a problem you didn't know you had until Captain Hardwick arrived and your staff couldn't save him without outside intervention." Rosenstein's pen paused. Chen's eyebrow raised slightly. Mercer's expression didn't change. "Go on." Sarah opened her laptop, pulled up the presentation, but didn't turn it around yet. "St. Catherine's is a level 1 trauma center. You handle everything from car accidents to gunshot wounds, but your protocols are built around civilian injury patterns, predictable mechanisms, standard treatments, controlled environments. That works 95% of the time. The other 5% kills people." "Bold claim," Chen said. "Do you have data?" Sarah turned the laptop. Slide 2 showed mortality statistics for combat-type injuries in civilian settings versus military field hospitals. These are DoD numbers, cross-referenced with CDC trauma data. Patients with penetrating torso injuries involving major vessels have a 42% mortality rate in civilian trauma centers. In military field hospitals, that number drops to 18%. The difference isn't equipment. Civilian centers often have better resources. The difference is training and approach. Mercer leaned forward. "You're saying our doctors aren't adequately trained?" I'm saying they're trained for civilian trauma, which is different from combat trauma in ways that matter when the patient is dying. Bullet trajectories, blast injuries, crush wounds from explosions, complex hemorrhage scenarios, these require different assessment and treatment protocols. Your staff is brilliant at what they do, but what they do doesn't cover every situation they'll encounter. And you believe a training program would address this gap? Chen's tone was skeptical but not dismissive. I know it would, because I've worked both environments. I've seen what happens when civilian-trained providers encounter military-style injuries without the right framework. They do what Dr. Brennan did 2 nights ago. They apply standard protocols to non-standard situations and miss critical details. He's an exceptional surgeon. He still would have lost that patient without intervention. Rosenstein spoke for the first time. Intervention that violated hospital policy and created significant liability exposure. Intervention that saved a life when protocol failed. Sarah met his eyes. Which brings me to my proposal. Rather than have random interventions by people who happen to have combat medicine experience, St. Catherine's implements a structured training program. Your trauma staff learns battlefield assessment techniques, advanced hemorrhage control, damage control surgery principles. When the next Captain Hardwick arrives, and he will, because this city has active shooter incidents, gang violence, and domestic terrorism threats, your team is prepared. They don't need someone to violate protocol. They know the protocol for that situation. Mercer was reading the slides now, his expression thoughtful. You've outlined a 6-month program, 50 contact hours of training, integration with existing trauma protocols. That's a significant investment of time and resources. Compare it to the cost of a wrongful death lawsuit when someone dies because your staff couldn't treat an injury they'd never been trained to handle, or the reputational damage when word spreads that a special operations officer nearly died here because standard care wasn't sufficient, or the federal scrutiny when the Department of Defense starts asking why civilian hospitals aren't prepared to handle combat casualties. Sarah paused. The investment is actually quite reasonable. Chen's lips quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. You've thought this through. I had 12 hours and a strong incentive to be thorough. Who would lead this training? Mercer asked. I would, initially. I've already consulted with a former military instructor who specializes in combat medicine education. He's prepared to assist with curriculum development and guest instruction. Long term, we'd build a sustainable program that doesn't depend on any single person. And your role at St. Catherine's would be? Combat trauma specialist. I consult on complex cases, lead the training program, and serve as a resource when the trauma team encounters situations outside standard protocols. I'm embedded in the department, not separate from it. I work alongside your doctors, not instead of them. Rosenstein cleared his throat. Ms. Mitchell, even if we agreed to this program, and I'm not saying we are, your previous violation of protocol remains an issue. We can't simply ignore that you countermanded a senior physician and contaminated a sterile field. You're right, you can't ignore it. Sarah closed her laptop, looked directly at Mercer. But you can reframe it. Instead of a violation, it becomes a case study. The incident that revealed a critical gap in your trauma capabilities and prompted innovative reform. St. Catherine's doesn't just discipline me, it learns from what happened and becomes the first major civilian trauma center to implement comprehensive combat medicine training. That's not a scandal, that's leadership. The room went quiet. Mercer and Chen exchanged a look, some wordless communication that Sarah couldn't decode. Rosenstein was writing furiously on his legal pad. Finally, Mercer spoke. Dr. Chen, your assessment? Chen steepled her fingers. The medical logic is sound. Combat trauma training would enhance our capabilities and potentially improve outcomes for a subset of critical patients. The liability concerns are real, but manageable if properly structured. My primary question is whether Ms. Mitchell has the credentials to lead such a program. I have 4 deployments, hundreds of combat casualty treatments, and advanced trauma life support certifications that exceed civilian requirements, Sarah said. What I don't have is a medical degree. If that's a deal breaker, I can work under physician supervision with clearly defined scope of practice. But the training itself doesn't require an MD. It requires someone who's done the work and can teach it. Fair point. Chen looked at Mercer. If we move forward, I'd want a trial period. 3 months, limited scope, with regular review. We assess outcomes, staff feedback, and practical impact before committing to full implementation. Rosenstein? Mercer turned to the lawyer. We'd need ironclad liability protections, detailed protocols for when Ms. Mitchell can intervene in active cases, and clear documentation of her authority and limitations. But conceptually, he set down his pen. This could actually reduce our exposure. Right now, we have an ad hoc situation where someone with unconventional training makes unilateral decisions. A formal program with defined structure and oversight is legally preferable. Mercer was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming the table in a slow rhythm. Sarah forced herself to breathe normally, to not fidget, to project the confidence Marcus had coached into her. I need 24 hours, Mercer finally said. This requires board approval, and I want to consult with our insurance carrier. Ms. Mitchell, you'll have an answer by this time tomorrow. Understood. Sarah stood. One more thing. Captain Hardwick is being transferred to a military medical facility later today. His commanding officer would like to speak with you before he leaves. He has information about how the Department of Defense views this incident and St. Catherine's response to it. I think you should take that meeting. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? It's information. What you do with it is your decision. Sarah picked up her laptop. Thank you for your time. She walked out before anyone could respond, her heart hammering but her stride steady. Marcus was waiting in the hallway, trying to look casual and failing completely. Well? 24 hours. Mercer wants board approval. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. Sarah exhaled slowly. He's going to talk to Hardwick's CO. That could go either way. It'll go your way. The feds made it clear they're watching this situation. Mercer's smart enough to recognize political pressure when it's staring him in the face. Marcus checked his watch. I've got surgery in 30 minutes. You okay? I'm fine. Just need to... Sarah's phone rang. Commander Hayes. She answered immediately. Lieutenant Mitchell. Hayes's voice was crisp. Captain Hardwick is being transported in 2 hours. His CO, Commander Frank Riggs, would like to meet with Mr. Mercer at 1 p.m. Riggs is bringing documentation about the military's interest in civilian combat trauma capabilities. I suggest you be present. I just left Mercer. I mentioned the meeting, but he just called my office accepting the invitation. He'll be there. Hayes paused. Riggs is old-school SEAL, direct, no-nonsense, very protective of his people. Hardwick told him what you did. Riggs wants to make sure St. Catherine's understands the value of what you bring to the table. Understood, ma'am. One more thing. The DoD liaison who visited yesterday, Richard Cordell, he's authorized to discuss a partnership opportunity if St. Catherine's is interested. Training grants, equipment support, consulting opportunities. The military needs civilian hospitals that can handle combat casualties for special operations personnel injured stateside. If your program gets approved, there's federal money available to support it. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, the pieces sliding into place, the impossible becoming possible. That's leverage. That's reality. The military can't build field hospitals in every American city, but we can partner with civilian trauma centers to ensure our people get appropriate care when they need it. You've already proven the concept works. Now we make it official. Hayes' tone softened slightly. You fought for this country for years, Lieutenant. Now you're fighting for the right to use what you learned in that fight to save lives here at home. That matters. Don't underestimate how much it matters. The call ended. Marcus was staring at her. What just happened? The federal government just offered to fund my training program if St. Catherine's approves it. Holy shit! Yeah. Sarah started walking, not sure where she was going, just needing to move. I need to be in that meeting with Riggs and Mercer. I need to make sure Mercer understands this isn't just about one program. It's about positioning St. Catherine's as a leader in a new field. You're thinking bigger than just getting your job back. I'm thinking about what actually matters, which is making sure the next time someone like Hardwick comes through those doors, the team that treats him is ready. Whether I'm the one who teaches them or someone else, that's what needs to happen. Marcus smiled. You know what? I think you might actually pull this off. At 12:45 p.m., Sarah stood outside conference room A again, this time wearing visitor credentials since her hospital badge was still surrendered. Marcus had vouched for her presence, claiming she was essential to the discussion. Mercer hadn't objected, which was either a good sign or an indication he wanted all his problems in one room. Commander Riggs arrived at 12:55 p.m., flanked by Commander Hayes and Richard Cordell. Riggs was exactly what Hayes had described. Mid-50s, weathered face, eyes that assessed threats with automatic precision. He wore his service uniform with the kind of casual authority that came from decades of leading men in impossible situations. He spotted Sarah immediately, approached her directly. "You're Mitchell." "Yes, sir." "Hardwick says you're the best combat medic he's worked with in 23 years. That's high praise from someone who doesn't give it easily." Riggs extended his hand. "Thank you for saving his life." Sarah shook his hand. "Just doing what I was trained to do, sir." "Which is exactly why we're here." Riggs glanced at the conference room door. "Let's make sure this hospital understands what they've got." The meeting was nothing like the disciplinary hearing or Sarah's proposal presentation. Riggs controlled the room from the moment he sat down, his presence filling the space with the kind of certainty that made arguing seem pointless. "Mr. Mercer, Dr. Chen, Mr. Rosenstein." Riggs's voice was calm but absolute. "I'm here to discuss Lieutenant Mitchell's actions 2 nights ago and their implications for St. Catherine's relationship with naval special warfare." Mercer's professional mask was firmly in place. "We appreciate you taking the time, Commander. Let me be direct. Captain Hardwick is one of the finest officers I've had the privilege to command. His survival is not just personally important to me, it's operationally critical to ongoing national security missions I can't discuss in this setting. Lieutenant Mitchell saved his life using techniques she learned through years of combat service. Your hospital's standard protocols were insufficient for his injuries. That's not a criticism, it's a fact that needs addressing." Chen shifted in her seat. "We're exploring options for enhanced trauma training." "I know. Lieutenant Mitchell briefed me on her proposal this morning." Riggs nodded to Sarah. "It's exactly what the military needs from civilian medical infrastructure, which is why I'm authorized to offer the following." He slid a folder across the table to Mercer. "If St. Catherine's implements Lieutenant Mitchell's combat trauma training program, the Department of Defense will provide a 3-year grant totaling $2.4 million to support program development, equipment acquisition, and ongoing training. Additionally, St. Catherine's will become a designated partner facility for special operations medical care in the Pacific Northwest region." Rosenstein nearly dropped his pen. Chen's eyes widened. Mercer opened the folder, scanned the first page, and went very still. "This is..." Mercer's voice trailed off. "Real money for real capabilities," Riggs finished. "The military has a vested interest in ensuring civilian hospitals can handle combat casualties. We can't rely on military medical facilities being accessible when our personnel need immediate care. Lieutenant Mitchell has demonstrated both the need for enhanced training and the expertise to provide it. We're prepared to invest in that." "With respect, Commander," Rosenstein said carefully, "this feels like significant pressure being applied to influence a personnel decision." "It's not pressure, it's opportunity." Riggs leaned back. "St. Catherine's is free to decline. But understand that the military will find a partner hospital in this region, one that recognizes the value of combat trauma capabilities and is willing to invest in developing them. Whether that's you or someone else is your choice. We're simply making clear what's available if you choose to move forward." Mercer was still staring at the grant documentation. $2. $4 million over 3 years. Plus equipment donations, consulting support, and priority access to military medical research. St. Catherine's would become a recognized leader in combat trauma care, which has substantial reputational value beyond the financial support. Cordell spoke for the first time. "We're not just funding a training program. We're building a partnership that elevates your institution's profile nationally." Chen found her voice. "What are the requirements? What would we need to commit to?" "Implementation of the training program Lieutenant Mitchell outlined, with specific benchmarks for staff certification and protocol integration. Quarterly reporting on outcomes and program effectiveness. Willingness to serve as a consultation resource for other hospitals interested in similar capabilities. And of course, employment of qualified personnel to lead the initiative." Riggs looked directly at Sarah. "Personnel like Lieutenant Mitchell." The implication was clear as crystal. Mercer closed the folder, his expression unreadable. This is a significant opportunity, but it's also a major commitment. I'll need to present this to the board, consult with our department heads. Understood. We're not asking for an immediate answer. Riggs stood. But I'd appreciate a decision within 1 week. The military's fiscal year planning requires timely commitments. If St. Catherine's isn't interested, we need to approach other facilities. 1 week, we can do that. Mercer stood as well, offering his hand. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Commander. They shook hands. The meeting broke up with the kind of professional pleasantries that masked the seismic shift that had just occurred. Sarah followed Riggs and Hayes into the hallway. Once they were out of earshot, Riggs turned to her. That administrator is calculating right now whether the money and prestige outweigh his wounded pride. Based on what Hardwick told me about the disciplinary hearing, Mercer doesn't like being told he's wrong. No, sir, he doesn't. But he likes his hospital being nationally recognized and federally funded. That's your leverage. Use it. Riggs paused. Hardwick also said you left the service because combat medicine was taking a toll. That true? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Yes, sir. 4 deployments, constant rotations, watching people die when there wasn't enough time or resources to save them. It accumulated. And now you're fighting to create a program that will train others to do exactly what burned you out. Riggs's expression was understanding, not judgmental. That's either healing or self-destruction. Haven't decided which yet. Maybe both, sir. Maybe. Riggs extended his hand again. Either way, you've got the military's support. Hardwick's being transferred to Bethesda for continued care, but he wanted me to give you this. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on hospital stationery. Lieutenant, you saved my life, but more importantly, you showed me what courage looks like when nobody's shooting at you. Standing up to bureaucrats is harder than standing up to enemy fire because the bureaucrats don't stop when you fight back. Don't let them make you small. The world needs people who refuse to be less than they are. Stay dangerous. Hardwick. Sarah folded the note carefully, tucked it in her pocket next to the challenge coin. Thank you, sir, for everything. Thank you, Lieutenant, for proving that the best combat medics know the mission doesn't end when the shooting stops. Riggs nodded once and walked away, Hayes following. Sarah stood alone in the hallway, the weight of the last 48 hours finally settling on her shoulders. She'd gone from humiliated float nurse to fired employee to potential department leader with federal backing, all in less than 2 days. And it still wasn't over. Marcus found her 10 minutes later. I just heard through the grapevine that the DOD offered Mercer $2.4 million. Tell me that's true. It's true. Jesus Christ, Sarah, you didn't just fight for your job. You turned yourself into a strategic asset. I didn't do anything except show them what was already there. The need was real. The solution was real. I just made both visible. Don't undersell it, you... Marcus's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression changed. Brennan to Trauma Bay 2, critical incoming. I have to go. He was already moving, that automatic shift into crisis mode. Sarah watched him disappear around the corner, then turned toward the elevator. She was halfway to the parking garage when her own phone rang. Patricia. Sarah, where are you? Leaving. Why? Get back to the Trauma Bay. Now. Patricia, I'm not... There's been a mass casualty incident, active shooter at a downtown office building. We've got multiple GSWs incoming, critical status. Brennan specifically requested you. Sarah's training overrode everything else. I'm on my way. She ran. The Trauma Bay was controlled chaos when she arrived. 3 gurneys already occupied, more incoming, the air filled with shouted instructions and the steady rhythm of monitors, blood on the floors, staff moving with practiced efficiency, the smell of gunpowder and fear. Brennan saw her the instant she entered. Mitchell, Bay 4, male, early 30s, multiple GSWs to chest and abdomen. He's crashing. I need your eyes on this. Sarah grabbed scrubs from the supply closet, changed in 15 seconds, and was at Bay 4 before Brennan finished his next sentence. The patient was young, pale, bleeding from at least 3 visible wounds. His pressure was dropping fast. The trauma team was moving, but Sarah saw the same pattern from Hardwick's case. They were searching, hunting, not finding. She stepped to the table. Talk to me. What have you found? A resident, Chen's nephew, she remembered, looked up. Entry wounds here, here, and here. We've controlled bleeding from 2 sites, but pressure's still dropping. There's another bleeder we can't locate. Sarah's eyes tracked the wound pattern, the angle of entry, the distribution of bruising. She'd seen this exact constellation in Fallujah, in Kandahar, in a dozen other places where bullets had found bodies and created damage that didn't follow textbook patterns. He's got a through and through that tracked posterior through the retroperitoneum. You're looking in the peritoneal cavity. Wrong space. Brennan moved to her side. Show me. Sarah positioned herself at the table, her hands moving with the certainty that came from repetition. The bullet entered here, deflected off the 11th rib, tracked downward and medial. It's likely nicked the left renal artery. You won't see it from an anterior approach. You need to mobilize the colon, get posterior access. Well, that's a complex dissection in an unstable patient. It's the only option that keeps him breathing. The bleed's retroperitoneal. Every second you search anteriorly is a second closer to exsanguination. Brennan looked at her, then at the patient, then back at her. A decision crystallized in his eyes. Everyone listen up. We're repositioning. Mitchell's right. We need posterior access. Rodriguez, start mobilizing the left colon. Chen, get me vascular clamps ready. Mitchell, you're staying on this table. I need you talking me through what you're seeing. The team shifted seamlessly, following Brennan's lead without question. Sarah stayed at his shoulder, calling out landmarks, warning of anatomical variations, guiding his hands through territory he knew intellectually but had never navigated under these exact circumstances. 10 minutes later, they found the bleed, controlled it, stabilized the patient. Brennan stepped back, blood to his elbows, and looked at Sarah with something like wonder. How many times have you done that? Enough to know the pattern, enough to teach it. The trauma bay doors burst open. 2 more gurneys. Patricia was shouting vital signs. The crisis was far from over. Brennan made a decision. Mitchell, you're with me for the duration of this incident. I don't care about protocols or permission. I need someone who knows combat wounds, and that's you. Objections? Nobody objected. For the next 4 hours, Sarah worked alongside St. Catherine's trauma team, moving from patient to patient, identifying patterns, suggesting approaches, doing exactly what she'd proposed in her presentation but now under live fire conditions, metaphorically speaking. By the time the last patient was stabilized and the trauma bay fell quiet, Sarah's scrubs were soaked with blood and her hands were shaking from adrenaline crash. Brennan found her in the scrub room, washing her hands with mechanical precision. 7 patients, he said quietly. All critical, all alive. 2 of them only because you saw what we missed. The team did the work. The team followed your guidance. There's a difference. Brennan stripped off his gloves. I'm going to tell Mercer that what happened today is exactly why your program needs to exist. That we just experienced a mass casualty event that required combat trauma expertise, and without you here, we would have lost patients. Sarah turned to face him. You don't have to. Yes, I do, because it's true, and because I'm tired of watching politics interfere with good medicine. He paused. You know what the team said after you identified that retroperitoneal bleed? They said, she was right again. Not she got lucky. Not she made a good guess. They said she was right. That's respect, Sarah. You earned it. Before Sarah could respond, Patricia appeared in the doorway. Sarah, Mercer wants to see you, now. The walk to administration felt longer than it should have. Sarah's body was exhausted, her mind still processing the chaos of the last 4 hours. But something else was building, a certainty that hadn't been there before. She'd proven her point not through presentations or proposals, but through action. 7 patients alive because she'd been there. That wasn't politics, that was results. Mercer's office door was open. He sat behind his desk, Dr. Chen in one of the visitor chairs, the federal grant folder open in front of them. Ms. Mitchell. Mercer's voice was different now, less hostile, more calculating. Dr. Brennan called me from the trauma bay. He gave me a detailed account of your contributions during today's mass casualty incident. Sarah waited. He also told me that 2 patients would have died without your specific intervention. Is that your assessment as well? I can't say definitively what would have happened. I can say I identified injury patterns that the team was initially missing, and that those identifications led to successful treatments. Whether someone else would have eventually found the same injuries, Sarah shrugged. Maybe, but time matters in trauma. Every second counts. Chen spoke. The team is calling it the most complex mass casualty event they've handled in years. Multiple critical patients, all with penetrating trauma, all requiring simultaneous advanced intervention. And you moved between cases identifying specific injury patterns that matched your combat experience. Yes, ma'am. That's exactly what you proposed in your training program, combat trauma pattern recognition. Yes, ma'am. Mercer closed the folder. I spoke with the board chair an hour ago. Gave him a preliminary briefing on Commander Riggs's offer and your proposal. He wants a full board meeting tomorrow morning, but he indicated strong support for moving forward. Sarah's heart rate spiked. Moving forward with? All of it. Your employment as combat trauma specialist, implementation of the training program, partnership with the Department of Defense, St. Catherine's becoming a designated facility for special operations medical care. Mercer paused. Pending board approval, which I expect to receive, you'll be reinstated effective immediately with a formal offer to follow. The words didn't quite register at first. Sarah heard them, understood their meaning, but her brain couldn't quite process that this was actually happening. Mr. Mercer, Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is a probationary arrangement, 3 months to prove the program works, with specific benchmarks for staff training and outcome improvements. If you don't meet those benchmarks, the partnership ends and your position is eliminated. Clear? Crystal clear, sir. Good. Mercer stood, extended his hand. Welcome back to St. Catherine's, Miss Mitchell. Don't make me regret this. Sarah shook his hand, her grip firm and steady despite the exhaustion flooding her system. I won't, sir. She left administration in a daze, barely registering the walk back to the trauma bay. The shift change was happening, exhausted staff heading home, fresh faces arriving for night duty, the normal rhythm of hospital life continuing as it always did. Marcus intercepted her near the elevators. Patricia told me. Congratulations. It's probationary, 3 months. It's a yes. 3 months ago, you were scrubbing toilets at a different hospital. Now you're a specialist with a federal grant and a mandate to transform how this place handles trauma. That's a win, Sarah. Take it. She wanted to. Wanted to feel the victory, the validation, the proof that fighting back had been worth it. But something was nagging at her, a detail that didn't fit. Marcus, the active shooter today, 7 critical patients, all with multiple GSUs. That's unusual. Even for a mass casualty event. Downtown office building, disgruntled employee apparently. SWAT took him down after he'd already done significant damage. Which building? Marcus checked his phone. Riverside Plaza. Why? Sarah pulled out her own phone, opened the news. The story was breaking across every outlet. Active shooter at Riverside Plaza, multiple casualties, suspect in custody. But it was the suspect's photo that made her blood run cold. She recognized him. Not personally, but professionally. The tactical vest, the weapon configuration, the entry wound patterns on the victims. This wasn't a disgruntled employee. This was someone with training, military training. And if she was right about what she was seeing, today's incident wasn't random violence. It was a field test. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. Lieutenant Mitchell. The voice was unfamiliar, male, calm. Congratulations on your new position. I hope you're ready for what comes next. The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen, her mind racing through implications and connections she didn't want to make. Marcus was staring at her. Sarah. Who was that? She couldn't answer, because the truth forming in her mind was impossible and terrifying and suddenly horribly plausible. Someone had just tested St. Catherine's combat trauma capabilities, and whoever they were, they knew exactly who Sarah was and what she could do. The question was why, and what they planned to do with that information. Marcus was already moving, his hand on Sarah's elbow, steering her away from the main corridor toward an empty patient consultation room. He closed the door behind them, and the sudden quiet made the ringing in Sarah's ears more pronounced. Talk to me, right now. Sarah's mind was processing at combat speed, connecting patterns, analyzing threats. The shooter today, his weapon configuration, his tactical approach, the wound patterns on the victims, that wasn't amateur hour. That was someone with professional training executing a specific mission profile. You think he was military? I think he was trained by someone who knows military tactics, and I think today wasn't random violence. Sarah pulled up the news photos again, zoomed in on details most people wouldn't notice. Look at the entry wounds on the victims we treated. All torso shots, multiple hits per target, tight groupings. That's not spray and pray. That's controlled fire from someone who's been taught to engage multiple targets efficiently. Marcus studied the images, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. You're saying this was planned? I'm saying someone created a scenario that required exactly the kind of trauma response I'm trained for. 7 critical patients, all with combat-style injuries, all arriving at St. Catherine's on the same day I'm fighting to prove we need combat trauma capabilities. Sarah met his eyes. That's not coincidence, Marcus. That's orchestration. That's insane. You're talking about someone staging a mass shooting to, what, prove a point? Or to test a response? Or to create a crisis that validates my presence here? I don't know yet. Sarah's phone was still in her hand, the dead call haunting her. But someone just called me, congratulated me on my new position, and said they hope I'm ready for what comes next. They knew about Mercer's decision before I'd even processed it. Marcus went pale. We need to call security. The police. Someone. And tell them what? That I have a suspicion based on tactical analysis and a cryptic phone call? Sarah shook her head. We need more information first. We need to find out who the shooter actually was, what his background is, whether there are any connections to... The consultation room door opened without warning. Commander Hayes stood in the doorway, 2 federal agents behind her. Her expression was granite. Lieutenant Mitchell, we need to talk. Now. The small room suddenly felt very crowded. Hayes dismissed the agents with a gesture, but they stationed themselves outside the door. Marcus started to leave, but Hayes stopped him. Dr. Brennan stays. He's involved now whether he wants to be or not. Sarah's combat instincts were screaming, Ma'am, what's going on? Hayes closed the door, checked her phone, then looked at both of them with the kind of intensity that preceded operational briefings. The shooter from today's incident has been identified. His name was Derek Vance, former Army Ranger, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for conduct violations. He's been on a watch list for suspected involvement with a domestic extremist cell that recruits former military personnel. Was? Sarah caught the past tense. He died in custody 2 hours ago, apparent suicide. Hayes's tone suggested she didn't believe that explanation for a second. Before he died, he made one phone call. Want to guess who he called? Sarah's stomach dropped. Someone connected to St. Catherine's. Someone connected to you specifically. The call was traced to a burner phone that pinged off a cell tower 3 blocks from this hospital. We're analyzing the conversation now, but preliminary reports suggest Vance was reporting mission completion to his handler. Hayes paused. Lieutenant, someone is very interested in your capabilities and your position at this hospital, and they're willing to kill civilians to create scenarios that test or validate those capabilities. Marcus looked like he might be sick. You're telling us today's shooting was a setup? That people died to, what, prove Sarah's training program was necessary? I'm telling you, that's one possibility we're investigating. Another possibility is that Vance went rogue, and his handler is trying to capitalize on the chaos he created. A third possibility is that this is part of a larger operation we haven't identified yet. Hayes focused on Sarah. But what's certain is that you've become a person of interest to people who operate outside legal boundaries. That makes you a potential target and a potential asset depending on their objectives. Sarah forced herself to think tactically, to suppress the emotional response and focus on actionable intelligence. The phone call I received 10 minutes ago, the one that congratulated me and warned me about what comes next. That was the handler. Most likely, we're tracing it now, but these people are professionals. They know how to avoid detection. Hayes pulled out a tablet, brought up a file. Here's what we know. Derek Vance was part of a group called Prometheus Circle, former military personnel who believe civilian institutions are unprepared for domestic threats, and that veterans should be embedded in critical infrastructure to ensure operational readiness. It's fringe ideology, but they've been growing quietly for the past 2 years. Let me guess, Sarah said quietly. They think the best way to demonstrate the need for veteran expertise is to create situations that require veteran expertise. Exactly. They stage incidents, then position their people as solutions. Get former military embedded in police departments, hospitals, security firms, anywhere that might respond to crisis situations. Once embedded, they control the response. Hayes swiped to another screen. We've been tracking them for 18 months, but they're careful. Today was the first time they've executed something this overt. Why St. Catherine's? Marcus asked. Why Sarah specifically? Because she's already proven she can do what they claim civilians can't. She saved Captain Hardwick when the hospital's standard protocols failed. She intervened in today's mass casualty event and improved outcomes. She's the perfect case study for their ideology, a combat veteran whose skills are superior to civilian-trained medical staff. Hayes looked directly at Sarah. They want you as a symbol, proof that veterans are essential to civilian infrastructure. The question is whether they want to recruit you or use you. Sarah's mind flashed to the phone call, to the calm certainty in the handler's voice. They already know I won't join them. This isn't recruitment. This is something else. I agree. Which means we need to figure out their actual objective before they make their next move. Hayes closed the tablet. Federal agents will be stationed at this hospital starting tonight. Your movements will be monitored for your protection, and I need you to report any contact, no matter how insignificant it seems. What about the patients from today? Sarah asked. The survivors of Vance's attack. Are they safe? As safe as we can make them. But understand, if Prometheus Circle staged today's incident, those victims were acceptable casualties in their larger mission. That's who we're dealing with, people who value ideology over human life. The weight of that settled over the room like a shroud. Hayes left shortly after, the federal agents trailing her. Marcus waited until they were alone again before speaking. You need to quit. Walk away. This is beyond dangerous, Sarah. These people are willing to kill to prove a point. Walking away doesn't make me safer. If they're using me as a symbol, leaving St. Catherine's just means they'll find another way to exploit what I represent. Sarah's voice was steady, despite the fear coiling in her gut. Besides, 7 people are alive today because I was here. However this situation started, that result is real. Those lives matter. So does yours. I know, which is why I'm going to figure out what Prometheus Circle actually wants and stop them before they hurt anyone else. Sarah stood, her exhaustion temporarily overridden by purpose. But first I need to check on the patients from today. Make sure they're stable. Sarah. I'm not hiding, Marcus. That's not who I am. The ICU was quiet during evening hours. Most visitors gone home. The critical patients monitored by skeleton night crews. Sarah found the 7 survivors from the Riverside Plaza shooting distributed across multiple bays, each one a testament to violence and the fragile resilience of human bodies. The youngest was 24, a paralegal who'd been at her desk when Vance entered the building. She was sedated, ventilated, her abdomen packed with surgical dressings from the damage control surgery they'd performed. Sarah checked her vitals, adjusted her IV rate, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with saving someone's life only to watch them fight for the next breath. The oldest was 56, a senior accountant who'd tried to protect a coworker and taken 3 bullets for his trouble. He was awake, groggy from pain medication, his eyes tracking Sarah as she entered his bay. You're the one who worked on me. His voice was rough, damaged from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour ago. One of many. You had an entire team. The other doctor, Brennan, he said you spotted something they missed. Said I'd be dead if you hadn't. His hand moved slightly, a gesture toward the chair beside his bed. Sit, please. Sarah sat, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. My daughter called, the man continued. Said she was on her way from Seattle. She's got 2 kids, my grandkids. I was supposed to visit them next month. His eyes were wet. I get to see them now because you knew what to look for. Mr. Carlson. Tom. Call me Tom. Tom, I'm glad I could help, but you should rest. You've been through trauma. We all have. Tom's gaze was steady despite the morphine. That man who did this. They're saying he was former military, like you. Sarah went still. I heard the nurses talking, said you were combat medic, that you'd seen injuries like ours in war zones. Tom's hand found hers, his grip weak but deliberate. I don't understand how someone who served this country could do what he did, but I understand how someone who served could save us the way you did. So thank you for being the kind of veteran who heals instead of destroys. Sarah couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. She squeezed his hand once, then stood and left before the emotion could break through. Patricia found her in the hallway, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed. You okay? No, but I will be. Sarah opened her eyes. The patients from today, they're going to make it, right? All 7. Critical but stable. You helped make that happen. Patricia studied her. I heard federal agents are stationed in the hospital now. Security's talking about it. Something about the shooter having connections to extremist groups. It's complicated. It always is. Patricia crossed her arms. For what it's worth, the trauma team is talking about today like it was a watershed moment. They saw what combat trauma expertise looks like in action. You've got believers now, Sarah. People who understand why your program matters. People almost died to create that demonstration. People almost died, but didn't. That's what matters. Don't let the ugly circumstances erase the good outcome. Patricia's phone buzzed. She checked it, frowned. Mercer wants to see you again, says it's urgent. Sarah felt a spike of adrenaline. Now? 10 minutes ago, apparently. He's in his office. The walk to administration felt like walking toward an ambush. Sarah's tactical awareness was heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every unexpected sound triggering combat reflexes. The federal agents Hayes had mentioned weren't visible, but she assumed they were there, watching. Mercer's office door was closed. Sarah knocked once, heard a muffled enter, and pushed through. The room held more people than she expected. Mercer behind his desk, Dr. Chen in her usual chair, and 2 others Sarah didn't recognize. A woman in an expensive suit and a man whose federal credentials were visible on his belt. Miss Mitchell, Mercer's voice was controlled but tense. This is Special Agent Diana Reeves and Assistant Director Michael Torres from the FBI. They have questions about today's incident. Sarah remained standing. I've already spoken with Commander Hayes from Naval Special Warfare. We're aware. Reeves gestured to an empty chair. Please sit. This won't take long. Sarah sat, her posture alert, hands visible, body language, communicating cooperation without submission. Torres opened a folder. Lieutenant Mitchell, we're investigating the possibility that today's mass shooting was a targeted operation designed to validate or demonstrate specific capabilities. Commander Hayes indicated you have tactical analysis experience that might be relevant. I observed that the shooter's approach showed professional training and that the injury patterns were consistent with controlled engagement rather than random violence. I shared those observations with Commander Hayes. You also received a phone call shortly after the incident concluded, a call that suggested prior knowledge of your employment status at St. Catherine's. Torres's eyes were sharp. Can you walk us through that conversation? Sarah recounted it precisely, word for word, tone for tone. When she finished, Reeves and Torres exchanged a look. The voice, Reeves said. Did you recognize it? Any distinguishing characteristics? Male, probably mid-40s, educated speech pattern, no obvious regional accent, calm to the point of clinical. He spoke like someone accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. Sarah paused. He also spoke like someone who'd done research on me. The phrasing wasn't generic. It was specific, personal. Which suggests, Torres began, but was interrupted by a knock on the door. A junior agent entered, handed Torres a tablet, whispered something Sarah couldn't hear. Torres's expression darkened. When? He asked sharply. 20 minutes ago. Torres stood. Miss Mitchell, we need to relocate you immediately. There's been a development. Sarah's combat training kicked in automatically. What kind of development? The kind that suggests Prometheus Circle isn't done with you yet. Reeves was already moving toward the door. We've intercepted communications indicating another operation is planned for tonight. Target location unknown, but your name was mentioned in the transmission. Mercer looked stricken. In my hospital? We don't know yet, but we're not taking chances. Torres turned to Sarah. You're coming with us. Protective custody until we can assess the threat level. I have patients who will be fine without you for a few hours. Marcus's voice came from the doorway. He must have followed the commotion. Go with them, Sarah. Let the professionals handle this. Sarah wanted to argue, to insist she could protect herself, to reject the idea of running from a threat. But the tactical part of her brain recognized that sometimes the smartest move was accepting backup when it was offered. All right, but I want updates. Every hour. Agreed. Torres motioned to the agent by the door. Collins, escort Dr. Brennan back to the trauma wing. Everyone else, lock down protocols. Nobody enters or exits this floor without clearance. The next 3 hours existed in a strange bubble of tension and waiting. Sarah was moved to a secure conference room in the hospital's administrative basement, a space designed for emergency operations that felt like a bunker. Federal agents stationed at the door, communications equipment set up on the table, monitors showing security feeds from throughout St. Catharines. Reeves stayed with her, working her laptop with mechanical efficiency. Torres was somewhere else in the hospital, coordinating response teams. How long have you been tracking Prometheus Circle? Sarah asked. Reeves looked up from her screen. Officially? 18 months. Unofficially, we've had suspicions for almost 3 years. They're careful, compartmentalized, and they recruit people who know how to avoid detection. Most of their members are former military or law enforcement with clean records and legitimate grievances about how veterans are treated in civilian society. They're not wrong about some of that. Veterans do struggle to integrate. Their skills are often undervalued. No argument there, but their solution, staging incidents to create crises that require veteran intervention, crosses every ethical and legal line imaginable. Reeves paused. Today's shooting? That was escalation. Before this, they'd focused on smaller operations, break-ins at police stations to expose security gaps, cyber attacks on hospital systems to demonstrate infrastructure vulnerabilities. Aggressive but non-lethal. Derek Vance killing civilians changes everything. Unless Vance went rogue. That's possible, but the phone call you received suggests otherwise. Someone with authority congratulated you and implied more was coming. That's not a rogue operator, that's someone executing a plan. Reeves closed her laptop. The question is what that plan actually entails. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The agents can't protect you from the truth, Lieutenant. What happened today was necessary. What happens next will prove why. She showed it to Reeves immediately. Reeves swore under her breath, forwarded the message to Torres, and activated her radio. We've got another contact, tracing now. 30 seconds later, Torres's voice crackled back. Burner phone signal bouncing through multiple towers. We won't get a location before they dump it. Sarah stared at the message. What happens next will prove why. They're not done. Whatever they're planning, it's imminent. Reeves was already on her feet, weapon drawn, moving to the door. Collins, status report. The agent outside responded immediately. All clear on this level, no unauthorized access. What about the trauma wing? A pause. Then, checking now. The pause stretched too long. Collins's voice came back, tight with tension. We've got a situation. Trauma Bay 2. Someone's barricaded inside with a patient. Sarah was moving before Reeves could stop her, her body operating on pure instinct. She was through the door and sprinting toward the stairs before anyone could grab her, taking the steps 3 at a time, emergency training overriding everything else. The trauma wing was in controlled lockdown when she arrived. Security doors sealed, staff huddled in the nurses' station, federal agents establishing a perimeter. Through the window of Trauma Bay 2, Sarah could see a figure in scrubs holding something in his hand. Not a weapon. A syringe. The patient on the table was Tom Carlson, the 56-year-old accountant who'd thanked her an hour ago. Marcus appeared at her side, breathing hard. That's Dr. Eric Yamada, trauma fellow. Been with us for 6 months. Quiet guy, competent, never caused problems. He's Prometheus Circle, Sarah said flatly. How do you... Because this is the next operation. They didn't attack the hospital. They infiltrated it. Sarah moved closer to the window, studying Yamada's posture, his positioning. He's not panicking. He's waiting. This is a message. Torres arrived with more agents, establishing command. Dr. Yamada, this is the FBI. Put down the syringe and step away from the patient. Yamada's voice came through the intercom, calm and measured. I'll do that as soon as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell agrees to hear what I have to say, face to face, just the two of us. Every federal agent in the corridor said no simultaneously. Sarah ignored them. What's in the syringe? Potassium chloride, enough to stop his heart in seconds if you don't agree to talk. Tom Carlson was awake, terrified, his eyes finding Sarah through the window. The man who'd thanked her for saving his life now depended on her again. Let me talk to him, Sarah said to Torres. Absolutely not. We don't negotiate with... He's not asking for negotiation. He's asking for conversation, and he's got a hostage who survived one attempt on his life today already. Sarah's voice was steel. I'm going in. Lieutenant, that's not your call. This is my area of expertise, and that's my patient. I'm going in unarmed, visible, no tricks. You keep your agents ready, but you let me try to talk him down. Torres looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Sarah's expression stopped him. 5 minutes. That's all you get. First sign of trouble, we breach. Sarah nodded once, then moved to the trauma bay door. Yamada watched her approach through the window, his expression eerily calm. When she entered, he didn't raise the syringe higher or back away. He just waited. Hello, Lieutenant. Thank you for coming. Sarah kept her hands visible, her movement slow and deliberate. Dr. Yamada, or should I call you something else? Eric is fine. I'm still a doctor, even if my priorities differ from this institution's. He glanced at the syringe. I'm not going to hurt Mr. Carlson unless you force me to. This is just insurance. Insurance for what? For being heard. For making sure people understand what happened today and why it mattered. Yamada's eyes were bright with conviction. You saved 7 lives today, Lieutenant. 7 people who would have died if you hadn't been here, if you hadn't recognized injury patterns that civilian-trained doctors missed. That's proof. Undeniable, documented proof that combat veterans have skills civilian medicine desperately needs. So you staged a mass shooting to prove that point? You killed innocent people? I didn't kill anyone. Derek Vance made his own choices. Yamada's voice didn't waver. But yes, the situation was engineered to demonstrate a truth this society refuses to acknowledge. Veterans are treated like broken toys when we separate from service. Our skills are dismissed, our experiences devalued. We're expected to become civilians overnight, to forget everything we learned, to pretend we're not fundamentally different from people who've never faced combat. So you decided to force the issue by creating combat situations in civilian settings. We decided to show civilians what they're missing by marginalizing us. You're the perfect example, Lieutenant. You were humiliated, dismissed, nearly fired for being too competent. Then a crisis happened, and suddenly everyone recognized your value. But it shouldn't take a crisis. Your skills should have been valued from day one. Sarah moved slightly closer, reading his body language, calculating distances. You're right that veterans are often undervalued. You're right that the transition to civilian life is difficult, and that our experiences aren't always understood. But you're wrong about the solution. Killing civilians to prove veterans can save them isn't advocacy. It's terrorism. It's demonstration. There's a difference. Tell that to the families of Vance's victims. Yamada's grip on the syringe tightened. Those deaths are tragic, but they're also necessary casualties in a larger war. A war to reclaim our place in the society we defended. To prove that we're not just damaged goods, we're assets, essential assets. By holding a patient hostage and threatening to murder him if I don't validate your ideology? Sarah shook her head. That's not strength, Eric. That's desperation, and it's not going to work. Then Mr. Carlson dies, and you'll have to explain why you valued principles over his life. Sarah took another step closer. Or you could put down the syringe, surrender to the agents outside, and live to actually make a difference. Because here's what you're missing. I did prove that combat trauma expertise matters. I did demonstrate the value of veteran medical skills. I did it by saving lives, by teaching others, by building something sustainable, not by threatening or killing. The program I'm creating at St. Catherine's will train hundreds of medical professionals. It will save thousands of lives, and it will do more to validate veteran expertise than any Operation Prometheus Circle could ever stage. They'll shut it down the moment the crisis passes. They always do. Then I'll make sure the crisis doesn't pass. I'll make the program so effective, so essential, that shutting it down becomes unthinkable. Sarah was close enough now to see the doubt creeping into Yamada's eyes. But I can't do that if you kill someone to make a point, because then this isn't about proving veteran value. It's about veteran violence. And that narrative destroys everything we're trying to build. Yamada was quiet for a long moment, the syringe trembling slightly in his hand. They won't let you succeed, he said finally. The bureaucrats, the administrators, the people who control these institutions. They'll find a way to undermine you, to take credit for your work, to push you out once you're no longer useful. Maybe, but I'd rather fail trying to build something than succeed at destroying things. Sarah extended her hand. Give me the syringe, Eric. Let me show you there's a better way. For 5 seconds, the outcome could have gone either way. Then Yamada's hand lowered. He placed the syringe in Sarah's palm, his eyes wet. I wanted to matter, he whispered. I wanted people to see what I could do. I know, but this isn't how. The trauma bay doors burst open, federal agents flooding in, weapons drawn. They had Yamada on the ground and cuffed in seconds, his Miranda rights being recited as they hauled him away. Sarah stood motionless, the syringe still in her hand, her entire body shaking with delayed adrenaline. Tom Carlson was crying, his monitors beeping their steady reassurance that he was alive, that the threat had passed. Torres approached carefully. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both. Sarah set the syringe on the medical tray with exaggerated care. Did you get what you needed? Everything. He confessed to being part of Prometheus Circle, acknowledged the mass shooting was staged to demonstrate veteran medical capabilities, implicated others in the organization. Torres almost smiled. You just gave us enough to dismantle their entire operation. Good, because I'm done being their proof of concept. Reeves appeared in the doorway. We've got teams moving on 3 other suspected Prometheus Circle members based on Yamada's communications. This is going to break nationally within hours. The hospital's going to be under intense scrutiny. Let it, Mercer's voice came from behind her. He stood in the corridor, Dr. Chen beside him, both looking shaken but determined. Let the scrutiny come. Because when it does, we'll show them exactly what St. Catherine's is building. A combat trauma program led by a veteran who stopped a hostage situation through conversation instead of violence. That's the story we're telling. Sarah turned to face him. You're going to use this for publicity. I'm going to use this to make sure your program has the support it needs to succeed. You just proved, again, that veteran expertise saves lives. Not through violence, through competence, courage, and compassion. Mercer's expression was sincere. The board meeting tomorrow is a formality now. You're hired, the program is funded, and St. Catherine's is going to be known as the hospital that got this right. Sarah wanted to feel triumphant, wanted to celebrate the victory, the validation, the proof that fighting back had been worth it. But all she felt was tired and suspicious. Because in her experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. Mr. Mercer, I appreciate the support, but I need something from you. Name it. Full transparency. No hidden agendas, no using my program for purposes I haven't agreed to, no corporate maneuvering that turns what I'm building into something I don't recognize. I'm here to train medical professionals and save lives. If that ever stops being the priority, I walk. Clear? Mercer met her eyes and nodded. Clear. You have my word. It would have to be enough. The next hour was a blur of statements to federal agents, debriefings with hospital security, and medical checks to ensure Tom Carlson was stable after his second near-death experience in one day. Sarah moved through it all mechanically, her body present, but her mind already processing, planning, preparing for whatever came next. Because something would come next. It always did. Marcus found her in the scrub room at 2 a.m., finally alone, finally still. You should go home, get some sleep. Can't, too wired. Sarah stared at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. She looked older than she had 48 hours ago. Harder. Is this what it's always going to be like? Crisis after crisis, proving myself over and over? Probably. At least until the program is established and people stop questioning whether you belong here. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. But for what it's worth, you've already won. Yamada's arrests, the federal investigation, Mercer's public support. You're not fighting for credibility anymore. You have it. Then why don't I feel like I've won? Because you're smart enough to know the real work is just beginning. Building the program, training the staff, making sustainable change. That's harder than any of the dramatic stuff you've dealt with this week. Marcus smiled slightly. But I've seen you work under impossible pressure. If anyone can do this, it's you. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the hardest part was over, that she could finally focus on the work instead of the politics. But her phone buzzed one more time, shattering that hope. Another unknown number. Another message. Yamada was a test. You passed. Now let's discuss what happens when you fail. She showed Marcus the screen, watched his face go pale. Sarah, this isn't over. No, she agreed quietly. It's not. Because somewhere out there, the real architect of Prometheus Circle's operations was still free, still watching, still planning, and Sarah had just become the most visible target in their next operation. Sarah forwarded the message to Torres within seconds. His response came back immediately. Stay where you are. We're coming to you. But Sarah was already thinking 3 moves ahead, her tactical training overriding the fear trying to claw its way up her throat. Whoever sent that message wanted her scared, reactive, vulnerable. The best way to counter that was to do the opposite, to be proactive, analytical, in control. Marcus, I need you to pull up the security footage from the past week. Every person who entered the trauma wing, every staff member who had access to patient records, every vendor, visitor, anyone. Sarah, the FBI is looking for Prometheus Circle members. I'm looking for someone who's been watching me specifically, someone who knew my schedule, my movements, my interactions with Mercer and the board. Her mind was racing now, connecting fragments. Yamada said Vance made his own choices, but he also said the situation was engineered. Engineered means planning. Planning means reconnaissance. Someone's been inside this hospital observing, documenting, preparing. Marcus pulled out his phone, accessing the hospital's security system through his administrator credentials. Okay, what am I looking for? Anyone who appears in multiple locations where I've been. Anyone who shows pattern behavior around the trauma wing, administration, the ICU. Cross-reference with staff who weren't scheduled to be in those areas. Torres arrived with Reeves and 4 additional agents before Marcus finished his search. The scrub room suddenly felt claustrophobic with so many bodies. Lieutenant, we need to establish a protective detail immediately. That message suggests... I know what it suggests. Sarah's voice was sharper than intended. She forced herself to moderate. But hiding isn't going to stop whoever's behind this. They've already demonstrated they can reach me anywhere, anytime. What we need is to identify them before they make their next move. We have Yamada in custody. He's talking, giving us names. Yamada is a true believer, not the architect. The person who sent this message is operating on a different level. They're strategic, patient, willing to sacrifice pawns like Vance and Yamada to achieve larger objectives. Sarah pulled up the message again. Look at the phrasing. Yamada was a test. You passed. That's someone evaluating performance, measuring outcomes. That's a recruiter or a handler, not a fellow soldier. Reeves was studying Sarah with newfound respect. You think they're still trying to recruit you? I think they're determining whether I'm an asset or a threat. Today proved I won't join them willingly, so now they're deciding whether to eliminate me or find another use for what I represent. Sarah turned to Marcus. Show me what you found. Marcus pulled up the security footage on his phone, expanded it to tablet size through the hospital's interface. There's someone, hospital chaplain named Michael Reese. He's been here for 8 months, assigned to provide spiritual support for trauma patients and staff. But look at his movement pattern. The footage showed a man in his late 40s, gray hair, kind face, wearing the simple collar and badge of hospital clergy. He appeared in the trauma wing 3 times during Sarah's first night. Once near the staff lounge when she was sitting alone. Again in the corridor when Brennan was yelling at her to stay out of his OR. A 3rd time near the ICU when Hardwick was first admitted. That could be coincidence, Torres said. Chaplains move throughout hospitals. Keep watching. Marcus scrolled forward. The chaplain appeared again during Sarah's disciplinary hearing, speaking briefly with someone in the hallway outside the conference room. Then near the trauma bay during the mass casualty incident. Then, and this made Sarah's blood run cold, entering Yamada's assigned locker area in the staff changing room 30 minutes before the hostage situation. "That's not coincidence," Sarah said quietly. "That's coordination." Reeves was already on her radio. "I need all available information on Michael Reese, hospital chaplain at St. Catherine's. Background check, service record if applicable, current whereabouts." The response came back within 2 minutes. "No chaplain named Michael Reese in our database. St. Catherine's employment records show he was hired 8 months ago with references from 3 hospitals. But when we contacted those facilities for verification, 2 don't exist, and the 3rd has no record of anyone by that name." Torres swore under his breath. "He's been embedded here for 8 months, long before any of this started." "Not before," Sarah corrected. "This has been planned for much longer than we realized. Prometheus Circle didn't just react to my presence. They positioned someone here in advance, waiting for the right veteran to appear. I just happened to be the one who showed up and demonstrated the exact capabilities they wanted to showcase." "Where is he now?" Reeves demanded into her radio. "Security cameras show him leaving the building 40 minutes ago. He hasn't returned." Sarah's phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "Meet me in the hospital chapel in 10 minutes. Come alone, or I start demonstrating what failure looks like. I have access to patient medication systems. You know what that means." She showed the message to Torres, watched his expression harden. "That's a threat to poison patients. We need to evacuate. We evacuate and he disappears. We lock down and he triggers whatever failsafe he's built into the medication system. Our only option is to engage." Sarah was already moving toward the door. "I'm going to the chapel." "Absolutely not. That's what he expects, which means you have approximately 9 minutes to position your team in ways he won't anticipate." Sarah stopped, turned back. "I've dealt with insurgents who threaten civilian populations to draw out targets. The playbook is always the same. They want you scared, desperate, making mistakes. We counter by staying calm and controlling the engagement space." Reeves stepped forward. "You're not military anymore, Lieutenant. You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. Because those patients upstairs, Tom Carlson and the others, they survived today because I was willing to step into dangerous situations. I'm not stopping now." Sarah's voice was steel-wrapped in certainty. "But I'm not stupid. Wire me. Give me an earpiece. Position your team where they can respond in under 30 seconds. And trust that I know how to handle someone who thinks they're smarter than me." 7 minutes later, Sarah walked through the hospital's main corridor toward the chapel, a nearly invisible wire running under her shirt, an earpiece disguised as a hearing aid transmitting Torres's steady breathing and whispered positioning updates. The chapel was located on the ground floor, a small interfaith space designed for quiet reflection. Stained glass windows filtered moonlight into soft colors. Rows of simple wooden pews faced a modest altar, and sitting in the front row, hands folded peacefully, was Michael Reese. He looked up when Sarah entered, his expression serene. "Thank you for coming, Lieutenant. Please, sit." Sarah remained standing. "You threaten patients. That's a line even Prometheus Circle supposedly doesn't cross." "Supposedly. But then you've already learned that organizations are only as ethical as their leaders, and leaders often sacrifice principles for results." Reese stood, moved to the altar with unhurried grace. "I didn't actually compromise the medication systems. I needed you here, not panicking. The threat was sufficient to achieve that objective." "So this is what? A job interview?" "More of an exit interview, actually. You see, Lieutenant, you've become problematic. You were supposed to be a symbol, a veteran whose exceptional skills proved civilians need us. Instead, you're becoming a bridge, teaching civilians to do what we do, integrating military expertise into civilian systems in ways that dilute our unique value." Reese's tone remained conversational, almost friendly. "That's not the narrative Prometheus Circle needs." "Then Prometheus Circle needs a better narrative." Sarah took 2 steps closer, her movements deliberate. "You've built an ideology around veterans being essential and undervalued. But I'm proving we can be valued by sharing what we know, not by hoarding it and creating crises that demonstrate our necessity. You're proving that civilians can learn to mimic our skills given proper training, which makes us replaceable, which defeats the entire purpose of our mission." Reese pulled something from his pocket, Not a weapon, but a small device that looked like a remote. I've spent 8 months positioning assets throughout this hospital. Yamada was one. There are others. And each of them has access to critical systems, patient care protocols, infrastructure controls. Sarah's tactical awareness spiked. You're bluffing. Am I? Dr. Leslie Park in oncology, former Navy corpsman, James Chen in facilities management, ex-Army combat engineer, Nurse Patricia Howell, former Air Force medic. Reese smiled at Sarah's expression. Yes, Patricia. She's been with Prometheus Circle for 3 years. She's the one who recommended St. Catherine's as a target institution because of its prestige and vulnerability. She's also the one who suggested humiliating you during your first shift to establish a clear narrative of civilian incompetence and veteran superiority. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Patricia, who'd given her coffee and advice. Patricia, who'd defended her during the disciplinary hearing. Patricia, who'd been there for every critical moment, observing, documenting, reporting back. You're lying. But even as Sarah said it, pieces were clicking into place. Patricia's convenient presence at key moments, her detailed knowledge of Sarah's background, her perfectly timed support that always came just when Sarah needed validation most. I'm illuminating. There's a difference. Reese held up the remote. This device sends a signal to my assets throughout the hospital. If I activate it, they each execute predetermined actions that will create chaos. Medication errors, equipment failures, security breaches. Nothing immediately lethal, but enough to demonstrate that St. Catherine's infrastructure is compromised. Enough to prove that without Prometheus Circle's cooperation, this hospital cannot function safely. Torres's voice whispered through Sarah's earpiece. We're in position. Say the word and we take him. Sarah kept her expression neutral. What do you want, Reese? If you were going to trigger that device, you would have done it already. This conversation means you want something else. I want you to understand what you're refusing. Prometheus Circle offers veterans purpose, community, recognition. We take the skills society tells us to forget and we make them essential again. We create situations where only we can provide solutions, which gives us power, leverage, value. Reese moved closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. You could lead that, Sarah. You have the credibility, the track record, the respect of both military and civilian communities. Imagine what we could build with you at the center instead of fighting us from the outside. You want me to help you terrorize civilians into depending on veterans. That's not purpose. That's extortion. It's survival. It's ensuring that the people who sacrificed everything for this country aren't thrown away the moment they're no longer convenient. Reese's mask was slipping now, emotion breaking through the calculated calm. I've watched hundreds of veterans struggle to integrate, to find meaning, to be recognized for what they can do instead of pitied for what they've endured. Prometheus Circle gives them that, and you could amplify it exponentially. By staging attacks, by threatening patients, by building a system that requires constant crisis to justify our existence? Sarah shook her head. That's not survival, that's parasitism. Real integration means making ourselves valuable through contribution, not coercion. Naive idealism from someone who's been back less than 2 years. Give it time, Lieutenant. Watch enough veterans get passed over for jobs, dismissed by people who've never faced combat, treated like damaged goods. Then tell me coercion isn't sometimes necessary. I've already watched it, I've lived it, and I chose a different path. Sarah's voice was quiet but absolute. I chose to teach, to share, to make the system better instead of holding it hostage. That's harder and slower and doesn't come with the adrenaline rush of playing puppet master, but it's sustainable, and it's right. Reese studied her for a long moment, then he raised the remote. I was hoping you'd see reason. Unfortunately, you've chosen to be an obstacle instead of an ally, which means you need to understand consequences. Torres now, Sarah said clearly. Federal agents burst through every entrance simultaneously, front doors, side entrances, even through the sacristy. Reese spun, the remote raised, his thumb moving toward the activation button. Sarah was faster. 4 deployments of combat training, hundreds of hours of hand-to-hand practice, muscle memory that functioned independent of conscious thought. She closed the distance between them in 3 strides, her hand striking Reese's wrist with precision that sent the remote flying. It clattered across the floor as agents swarmed, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Reese was on the ground in seconds, hands cuffed behind his back, agents reading his rights while others secured the remote in an evidence bag. Torres appeared at Sarah's side. "You okay?" "I'm fine, but we need to secure the other assets he mentioned. Park, Chen, and—" She couldn't quite finish the sentence. "Patricia Howell." "I know. We already have teams moving." Torres's expression was grim. "We'll need you to identify her, confirm she was your charge nurse." The walk back to the trauma wing felt surreal. Federal agents were everywhere now, securing staff, checking credentials, isolating anyone who'd been identified as potential Prometheus Circle members. The hospital was locked down, visitors being questioned, every system being verified for tampering. Patricia was in the nurse's station when Sarah arrived, still wearing her scrubs from the shift, still looking like the competent professional who'd guided Sarah through her first terrible night. Their eyes met across the corridor. Patricia's expression was complex: regret, defiance, something that might have been respect. "You figured it out," Patricia said quietly as agents moved to flank her. "Reese told me, but I should have seen it earlier. The perfectly timed support, the convenient advocacy during moments when I needed witnesses. You were building a narrative. I was helping you. Everything I said about your capabilities was true. Everything I told Mercer and the board was accurate. I just had different reasons for wanting you to succeed." Patricia didn't resist as agents cuffed her. Prometheus Circle needed a success story. A veteran who proved civilian institutions can't function without our expertise. You were supposed to be that story. Instead, I'm the story of why your approach doesn't work, why veterans don't need to stage crises to prove our value. We just need opportunities to demonstrate it legitimately. Sarah's voice was steady, despite the betrayal cutting through her. "You could have helped me build something real, Patricia. Instead, you built a lie." The lie was necessary to create space for the truth. Civilians don't respect what they don't fear. We had to make them afraid of what happens without us before they'd value what happens with us. No, you had to make yourselves feel powerful in a world where you felt powerless. That's different. Sarah stepped back as agents began leading Patricia away. "I hope someday you understand that." Patricia paused at the corridor's end, looking back. "I hope someday you understand that your idealism only works because people like me created the fear that made room for it. You're welcome, Lieutenant." Then she was gone. The rest of the night dissolved into procedural efficiency. Dr. Leslie Park and James Chen were arrested without incident. Both confessed immediately. Both expressed the same ideology of veteran exceptionalism that had motivated the entire operation. By dawn, 17 Prometheus Circle members had been identified and detained across 3 states, their network dismantled, their operations exposed. St. Catharines became the center of a national news story about domestic terrorism, veteran radicalization, and one combat medic who'd stopped a conspiracy from the inside. Sarah watched the sunrise from the hospital roof, exhausted beyond measure, the city spreading below her in the pink-gold light of morning. Marcus found her there at 6:30 a.m., 2 coffees in hand again. "You should be sleeping." "Can't. Brain won't stop processing." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "Is it over? Really over?" "According to Torres, yes. Reese is talking, giving up everyone to try for a reduced sentence. The FBI has enough to prosecute the entire organization. It's done." Sarah wanted to feel relief, wanted to celebrate victory, but all she felt was profound sadness for people like Patricia and Yamada, veterans who'd needed purpose so badly they twisted themselves into weapons. "The board meeting is in 3 hours, Marcus said after a long silence. "Mercer called. They want to make a formal announcement about your program, position you as the hero who stopped a terrorist plot." "I don't want to be positioned as anything. I just want to do the work." "I know, but you don't get that option anymore. You're visible now. National news, federal investigation, the whole package. How you handle that visibility will determine whether your program succeeds or becomes a cautionary tale." Marcus paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're exactly the person to handle it. You've already proven you can't be manipulated, intimidated, or convinced to compromise your principles. That's rare." The board meeting was held in St. Catherine's largest conference room, with media present, federal officials observing, and every major department head in attendance. Sarah sat at the head of the table in clean scrubs. She'd refused the suggestion to wear professional attire, insisted on representing herself as a working medical professional, not a corporate symbol. Douglas Mercer stood to address the assembled group, his expression grave but determined. Over the past 72 hours, St. Catherine's Regional Medical Center has experienced both crisis and revelation. We've learned that our institution was targeted by a domestic terrorist organization seeking to exploit veteran expertise for ideological purposes. We've also learned that we had within our walls someone whose courage and capability stopped that organization from achieving its objectives. I'm speaking, of course, about Sarah Mitchell. Cameras flashed. Sarah kept her expression neutral. Mercer continued. Ms. Mitchell came to this hospital seeking employment as a registered nurse. What she brought was 4 deployments of combat medical experience, hundreds of life-saving interventions, and a level of expertise we didn't initially recognize or value. That failure of recognition nearly cost us not just her talents, but the lives of patients we're entrusted to protect. Today, I'm announcing several initiatives to ensure we never make that mistake again. Dr. Chen stood, taking over the presentation. First, effective immediately, Sarah Mitchell is appointed Director of Combat Trauma Medicine at St. Catherine's, with full authority to develop and implement training programs for our entire trauma department. Second, we're establishing a Veterans Integration Initiative to actively recruit former military medical personnel and ensure their skills are appropriately recognized and utilized. Third, we're partnering with the Department of Defense to make St. Catherine's a designated Center for Combat Casualty Care Research and Training. The room erupted in applause. Sarah remained seated, hands folded, accepting the recognition but not performing for it. When the noise subsided, Mercer gestured for her to speak. Sarah stood slowly, taking in the faces around the table, some genuinely supportive, others calculating how to benefit from her new prominence, still others uncertain what to make of the woman who'd upended their entire institution in less than a week. Thank you for the recognition and the opportunity. I want to say something about what happened here and what it means going forward. She paused, choosing words carefully. Prometheus Circle was wrong in their methods, but they identified a real problem. Veterans do struggle to integrate into civilian society. Our skills are often undervalued or misunderstood. We're frequently treated as broken rather than experienced, as liabilities rather than assets. That needs to change, and it needs to change through systemic reform, not through the kind of violent demonstration Prometheus Circle attempted. She looked directly at Mercer. St. Catherine's has an opportunity to lead that reform, not by positioning me as some exceptional case, but by creating pathways for all veterans with medical experience to contribute meaningfully to civilian healthcare. That means changing hiring practices, adapting protocols to incorporate combat medicine techniques, and training civilian staff to understand and value what veterans bring to the table. It also means holding ourselves accountable when we fail to recognize talent because it doesn't fit our preconceptions. Sarah's gaze swept the room. I was humiliated my first night here. Dismissed, mocked, told I was a liability. Some of that was deserved. I was uncertain, unfamiliar with your systems, genuinely struggling to adapt. But some of it was prejudice. Assumptions about who I was based on how I looked, how I spoke, how I carried myself. We have to do better. Not just for veterans, but for anyone whose expertise doesn't fit traditional molds. The room was absolutely silent. So yes, I'll build this program. I'll train your staff and improve your outcomes and make St. Catherine's a leader in combat trauma medicine. But I'm also going to push you. I'm going to challenge assumptions, question protocols, and insist that we keep improving even when it's uncomfortable. Because that's what real excellence requires: constant evolution, perpetual willingness to learn from people who know things you don't. If you're not ready for that, tell me now. Mercer was the first to respond, standing and offering his hand across the table. We're ready, Director Mitchell. Make us better. The handshake was firm, public, witnessed by everyone who mattered. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Then, let's get to work. The weeks that followed were intense but productive. Sarah developed curriculum, recruited instructors, and began training St. Catherine's trauma staff on combat medicine principles. The program started small, a pilot group of 15 doctors and nurses who volunteered for the first cohort. Within 3 weeks, the waitlist was over 100 people. Captain Hardwick returned from Bethesda for a follow-up visit and spent an afternoon lecturing to Sarah's first class, describing what battlefield medicine looked like from a patient's perspective. His presence validated everything Sarah was building and provided the kind of real-world context that made the training visceral and memorable. The 7 survivors from the Riverside Plaza shooting became unexpected advocates. Tom Carlson in particular made a point of attending every media interview about the incident, consistently emphasizing that Sarah's expertise had saved his life and that her program was essential for civilian hospitals. By the end of the first month, St. Catherine's Combat Trauma Program had treated 14 patients with injury patterns that would have been missed or mismanaged under standard protocols. Outcomes improved measurably. Mortality rates for penetrating trauma dropped by 18%. The hospital received national recognition for innovative veteran integration, and Sarah finally felt like she could breathe. 3 months after her chaotic first night, she found herself back in the same trauma bay where everything had started, supervising a case involving a construction worker who'd been impaled by rebar. The attending physician was a young doctor named Rivera, who'd completed Sarah's training 2 weeks earlier. Rivera assessed the wound, recognized the pattern Sarah had taught her to identify, and calmly explained to the team exactly how to proceed. The patient was stabilized efficiently, transferred to surgery, and saved without the kind of dramatic intervention that had characterized Sarah's early cases. That, Sarah realized, was true success. Not being the hero who saves the day, but building a system where heroes aren't necessary because everyone knows what to do. Marcus found her in the observation gallery, watching Rivera close the case. Proud of your student? Very. She's going to be better than me eventually. They all will be because they're learning from multiple teachers and integrating combat medicine into their existing expertise. That's the goal. Mercer asked me to tell you the DoD grant has been approved for renewal. 3 more years, increased funding, expansion to include mental health support for veterans transitioning to civilian medical work. Marcus grinned. You've built something sustainable, Sarah. Something that's going to outlast you. That's the whole point. I don't want this to be about me. I want it to be about the work, the outcomes, the lives saved. Sarah turned from the window. Speaking of which, I got a call from Seattle General yesterday. They want to implement a similar program, asked if I'd consult. You should. Spread the model. Make this a national standard instead of a St. Catherine's exception. I will. But I'm staying based here. This is where it started. This is where I prove it works. Sarah smiled. Plus, I have a feeling if I left, you'd have no one to keep you humble when you start thinking you're the best surgeon in Portland. I am the best surgeon in Portland. See? Already getting ahead of yourself. They were laughing when Patricia's replacement, a former Army medic named James Rodriguez, appeared in the doorway. Director Mitchell, there's a patient in Bay 4 asking for you specifically. Former Marine, motorcycle accident, complex injuries. He heard you were here and requested combat trauma assessment. Sarah stood immediately, the laughter fading into professional focus. Tell him I'm on my way. As she walked toward Bay 4, passing nurses and doctors she'd trained, working in a hospital that had transformed from hostile territory into something approaching home, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness. She'd come to St. Catherine's broken and uncertain, trying to escape war while carrying all its scars. She'd been dismissed, humiliated, nearly destroyed by people who couldn't see past their own assumptions. But she'd fought back, not with violence or coercion, but with competence, courage, and an absolute refusal to be less than she was. She'd proven that veterans weren't damaged goods requiring pity or exceptional warriors requiring crisis to demonstrate value. They were professionals with hard-earned expertise that deserved recognition, integration, and respect. She'd built something real from the wreckage of Prometheus Circle's ideology, something that elevated everyone instead of requiring others to fail so veterans could succeed. And she'd done it by being exactly who she was, refusing to compromise and trusting that excellence would eventually be recognized if she just kept doing the work. The patient in Bay 4 was young, maybe 25, his tactical tattoos visible beneath the blood and road rash. He looked terrified until he saw Sarah's approach. Then something in his expression relaxed. You're Lieutenant Mitchell. Just Sarah now. But yeah, I'm who you asked for. She pulled up a stool, began her assessment with practiced efficiency. Tell me what happened. As he described the accident and she evaluated his injuries, Sarah felt the familiar rhythm of combat medicine settle over her, the calm focus, the systematic analysis, the absolute certainty that came from doing what she'd been trained to do. This was who she was. Not a victim of circumstance or a symbol for other people's agendas, but a professional who saved lives because she knew how and because it mattered. The young Marine finished his account. Sarah completed her examination and looked him in the eyes. "You're going to be fine. We've got this. I've got you." His shoulders dropped, tension releasing. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet. Wait until after surgery." Sarah stood, began giving orders to the team assembling around the trauma bay. They moved with the precision she'd trained into them, each person knowing their role, the entire system functioning with the kind of seamless efficiency that made excellence look easy. As the patient was prepped and transferred, as the controlled chaos of emergency medicine flowed around her, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She'd started this journey terrified and uncertain, trying to hide what she was to fit into a world that didn't want her. She was ending it confident and certain, having changed that world to make room for people like her, not by forcing acceptance through fear, but by earning respect through competence. Not by making herself smaller, but by refusing to apologize for being exactly as capable as she was. Not by fighting against the system, but by transforming it from within until it became something better than what she'd found. The young Marine was wheeled towards surgery, stable and calm, his life preserved by a team that wouldn't have known how to save him 3 months ago. Sarah watched him go, then turned back to the trauma bay, ready for whatever came next. Because there would always be a next patient, a next crisis, a next opportunity to prove that the skills earned in war had value in peace. And she would meet each one the same way she'd met everything else since that terrible first night when doctors had laughed at the trembling nurse in oversized scrubs. With competence, with courage, with the absolute certainty that she belonged exactly where she was, and with the quiet knowledge that the strongest victories weren't won through dramatic gestures, but through persistent excellence that made the impossible routine and turned dismissed outsiders into recognized leaders. Sarah Mitchell had come to St. Catharines seeking a fresh start. She'd found something better, a purpose, a platform, a proof that refusing to be diminished by other people's limitations was the first step toward changing what those people believed was possible. The trauma bay's doors closed behind her as she moved toward the next case, the next challenge, the next life that needed saving. And somewhere in the city beyond the hospital's walls, other veterans were watching her story, seeing the path she'd carved, understanding that they too could be valued not despite what they'd survived, but because of what they'd learned. That was the real victory, not the program, or the recognition, or the vindication, but the proof that warriors could become healers without sacrificing their strength, that the same hands that had stopped bleeding in war zones could teach others to do the same in peace, that being underestimated was just the beginning of the story, not the end, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply refuse to be less than you were and trust that excellence would eventually speak louder than doubt. Sarah stepped into the next trauma bay, met the eyes of the team waiting for her guidance, and smiled. "All right," she said, "let's work."